Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the AAUW California School Board Project Defending the Frontline of Democracy program. Your host today is Kathy Harper, and I'm going to introduce her and then I will go silent. And Kathy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Sandy. And I want to just start by saying thank you to you and your team for all your great technical help getting the symposium off the ground for us today and behind the scenes. And thanks so much. So good morning, everyone. I'm really excited about today's program. I'm excited to see, I can't see you, but I know you're out there. I know we have a fantastic turnout, and it's just so encouraging that so many of you are interested in finding out how to help us advance AUW values through education advocacy. We have an incredible lineup of speakers, and I can't wait to introduce them all to you. But before I do, I want to take just a few moments to talk about the school board project, which the AAUW California Public Policy Committee established 3 years ago. Many of you have been consistently participating in the project this whole time, this whole 3 years, and we thank you for your diligence. But many of you are new to the project, so I just want to take a few minutes to give a quick summary and update. The project arose, as I said, 3 years ago, from alarm at the strength and breadth of very regressive groups that were making it a point to advocate at school board meetings for book bans, censorship of curriculum, and policies that were harmful to our LGBTQ youth, and to select school board members who supported those policies. The Public Policy Committee formed the school board project with the blessing of and a mandate from our state board to, number one, encourage our members to attend school board meetings and to stand up and speak out on behalf of our values and to counter misinformation. Number two, to develop tools to educate our members and give them the skills and confidence to appear at meetings and feel confident to speak up. And for those of you who are new to the project, you can find all the information you need, including a toolkit that our committee put together. And also you can find the initial webinar we did when we started the project that gives you all the information that you need about the project. The communications team has dropped a link to that, to our webpage in the chat. I'm sorry, in the Q&A, and you can find that, and you can find that there. And when you click on that, it'll give you all the information that you need. And then number three, the third part of our mandate was to encourage our members to identify, recruit, and support candidates for school board offices who share our values. In the last year, we have been focusing primarily on school board meetings, and we pulled back a little bit on the aspect of our project that was focused on finding candidates and getting them elected. We've been looking for a good partner for that part of the project. So this year, we're entering phase 3, and our new focus will be on, number one, ensuring that school board members are following California laws. We know that a lot of other counter laws are coming at us every day, and our keynote speaker is going to address that. And then we're going to be circling back a little bit to school board elections this year. Now, some of you may be wondering why we're doing this, and if I could have my first slide up. So why are we involved in a project like this? This is always a good time for us to remember to come back to our California public policy priorities. That guides all the work that the Public Policy Committee does. And 3 tenets of our priorities say that we support equal access to quality public education for all students. We support civic instruction in all California high schools. And we support access to diverse staff and curriculum that represents historically accurate information. So all 3 of these tenets are part of what the school board project is all about and what we're working toward. And in addition, some of you may be wondering what this has to do with democracy and why are we calling the symposium the Frontline of Democracy? Could you just go back to the last slide for just a minute? I'm not quite ready for this one yet. Thanks. I just want to give a little intro about it. So last fall, one of our members brought my attention to an article written by a woman named Kirsten Schwette. She's the director of a group called the School Board Integrity Project, whose goal is to elect school board candidates who share our values. The article was called School Boards, the Overlooked Frontline of Democracy. And I have to tell you, it blew my mind. Kirsten recognized what many of us are feeling right now, overwhelmed by the ever-changing and often unrecognizable national political landscape, and feeling at times utterly helpless to do anything about it. Here's what she wrote. Now we can go to the next slide, if you would. In this article that she wrote for, it's a publication called The Guardian, she said, in a democracy, power isn't just about who sits in Washington or state capitals. It's about who controls local budgets, who builds the pipeline of future political leadership, and who decides what the next generation learns. Next slide. She went on to say, every school board member we elect who believes in good governance, academic freedom, and inclusive communities is an investment in democratic leadership for decades to come. They serve with the understanding that the future we choose for our public schools is the future we choose for our country. I know you're all here today because you're choosing a future where our kids are free to learn without censorship and all students are treated with respect and dignity. So let's get started. Next slide, please. Here's what we'll be covering today. And you may have seen this before in our promotional materials, and you may have noticed that there's been a slight change. So I just want to make a little note. Unfortunately, Kirsten Schwette, the same one who I just referenced, and by the way, she did give me permission to use her title. She was scheduled to present a workshop for us today on recruiting and supporting school board members, but unfortunately, she will not be able to join us. So instead of doing two workshops, our other scheduled workshop on collaborating for greater community impact will be a plenary session instead of a workshop. The good news is you don't have to choose between two workshops, and you will all now have the opportunity to sit on this one great presentation. So after my little opening here and overview, we will next have our keynote on federal challenges to California education laws. That will be followed by a presentation by the Public School Defenders Hub on how to effectively monitor school board meetings for compliance with California laws. Following that, we'll have a little break, just about 5 minutes to get up and stretch, hit the fridge if you need to, or get a cup of tea. And that when we come back, we'll have a panel discussion with 3 presenters who will talk with you about challenges facing our school boards and how our members can assist them in ensuring an equitable and quality education for all California students. We'll have another little break following that panel presentation, and then we'll come back for our plenary on coalition building for greater community impact. And when they've finished, we'll, if you want to stick around, we'll have a little wrap up and a final Q&A for those of you who didn't get your questions answered earlier. And as Sandy mentioned, there will be time for Q&A of each of our presenters following their presentation. And now let me introduce you to our presenters. Next slide, please. So Richard Barrera will be our keynote speaker, followed by Brianna Mullen, who will be talking about school board monitoring. Next slide. Here are our 3 panelists, Nancy Young, Ariel Bustamante, and Lisa Gross, and they will be talking about the challenges facing school boards. And then finally, our 2 plenary presenters, Diana Rohini Levine and Ogie Strogatz. Sorry, Ogie. And they'll be doing their talk on collaborating for greater community impact. So at this time, it is my great honor to introduce our keynote speaker, Richard Barrera. Richard Barrera is currently a trustee for the San Diego Unified School Board, a position he has held continuously since 2008. He also serves as deputy superintendent and senior policy advisor at the California Department of Education, where he leads initiatives to protect our immigrant students and to support student wellness and mental health. A first-generation San Diegan whose father immigrated to the United States from Colombia and whose grandparents immigrated through Ellis Island, Richard has spent nearly 3 decades striving to improve the lives of working families in San Diego and throughout the United States. Richard holds a bachelor's degree in history from UCSD and a master's degree in public policy from the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. In 2022, Richard was named School Board Member of the Year by the San Diego County School Boards Association. I couldn't think of a better person to help us understand how California's school boards are being impacted by all the edicts coming out of Washington, D.C., and the challenges they present to California's protective education laws. Richard, it's all yours.
Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you so much for what you're doing and your focus on school boards. And the point that you're making about school boards as the front line of democracy, I think is so important because I think a lot of us would agree that a public school system, a healthy public school system, is in fact the most important institution in a democracy. As Kathy going through my bio, my family's history is that the public schools have meant everything to us. My dad came to this country not speaking English, um, having to work 4 jobs, to support us when we were young. My mom was the first in her family to graduate from college. But what the public school system has meant to our family is no matter what our circumstances were when we came into school, uh, we feel like we're able to contribute, now to our community and to our democracy. And so, a country that allows um, young people, again, whatever their circumstances, uh, to then become contributors and leaders in a society. That's a healthy democracy, but that can only happen if we have a healthy public school system. As Kathy mentioned, I'm in my 18th year now on the San Diego Unified School Board. We're the second largest school district in California. And the portion of the city of San Diego that I represent is first generation immigrant communities, working families, parents working 2 or 3 jobs at once, so that their kids, can have a bright future. And it's all about the strength of our public schools, and in particular, for the families that I represent and that I'm able to work with in San Diego. We know that we have to get it right in our neighborhood public schools because there's no backup plan for our families. If our kids are struggling and falling behind, our parents are not going to hire private tutors. If we strip arts and music out of our curriculum, our families are not going to be able to pay for music lessons or put their kids in alternative programs. We have to provide that through the public school system. And when we do, we see our young people not only thrive, but be motivated to get out and contribute to the strength of their community. So I know what a healthy public school system can do. And I also, am very familiar with public school systems coming under attack. Um, you know, Whether in this case, what we're going to talk about today from the federal government, or whether it's frankly, just, coming from people who have an agenda of privatizing and, turning, our public school systems over to private vendors, or whether it's simply people who don't want to pay taxes. And so they come after our public school system. That's not new. And in California, as we all know, we're about to hit the 50th anniversary of Prop 13, which was a moment where California went from one of the best and most heavily funded public school systems in the world, and I extend public school systems to not only our, pre-K to 12, but our community colleges, our Cal State system, our UC system, to almost overnight being one of the worst funded public school systems in the United States. And we've been living within that world where our students, our educators, just don't have what they need for almost 50 years now. And that's been compounded with the idea that the way you improve our public school system is you treat our public schools like a corporation and you narrow down the notion of outcomes to what's most easily measured, and that often means standardized testing, and then you have a kind of a rewards and punishment system where an individual educator, a school district, is rewarded if those standardized test scores go up and is punished if those standardized test scores go down. And all in the name of supposedly making progress, especially for our, Black and brown students, our students, uh, whose families are struggling the most. But it's a concept that is rooted, I believe, in being able to continuously claim that our public school systems are failing. And because our public school systems are failing, we should dismantle them and instead, turn to a privatization model. So we've been living with that reality, for almost 50 years in California. In terms of what we're seeing from this administration, one thing that is not unique about the Trump administration is the federal government is always looking for ways to leverage um, its resources to determine decisions that are made at the state and the local level. And that's not surprising because if you want to have some impact on education, and you're in Congress or you're in the White House, the big challenge that you have is so little of the actual funding for education comes from the federal government. So today in California, the federal government provides less than 10% of funds for public schools, and we'll go into that a little bit. Um, and why your project is so important, most of the decisions that affect our students are really made by local school boards. So the United States and California, very much when it comes to public education, is a system of local control. So in California, we've got about 1,000 school districts, all governed by local school boards. And it's those local school boards that are making the decisions about curriculum, about programming, about who's going to run those districts, about budgeting, and again, I think about a district like ours in San Diego, which is a very diverse district. Are we going to prioritize our resources for the students who live in a sub-district like mine? Um, and that's about an investment in equity, or are we going to exacerbate existing inequities in the way that we make funding decisions? Those decisions are all made by local school boards. School boards obviously have to operate within the parameters of state law and federal law. But really, when it comes down to the decisions that are going to affect our young people, it is local school boards across the country that are making those decisions. And so when we think about, if we believe that public schools are the most important institution in a democracy, then your focus on local school boards is really right on, because it's those local school boards that are really determining the strength of public schools. but in that sort of decentralized system that we live in, if you're the federal government and you want to have some influence over what happens in public education, you are needing to find a way to leverage the resources that you provide to local states and local districts, and try to use that leverage to push those local school boards to make the kind of decisions that you want. And again, that's not unique to the Trump administration. I mean, No Child Left Behind, which, we're still living under that framework, that really reduced the definition of public education to what could be measured on once a year standardized test scores in reading and math. Um, that was done by the George W. Bush administration. What we saw under President Obama was the move to Common Core standards. So before Common Core, every state had its own system and its own standards when it came to measuring student achievement. The Obama administration leveraged its limited resources that it provides to local and state school systems to get every state to agree to be part of that Common Core framework. Um, and so now we see, the Trump administration, and we saw this during the first Trump administration. Of course, it's been more aggressive in the second Trump administration. So, what does the Trump administration care about, and what is it trying to do in influencing public education? On the one hand, it's using the same playbook. It's saying we've got these resources. They're not much when we look at the total funding that schools get, um, but they are important. And federal funding for public schools is largely focused on supporting students with special needs through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, um, and focused on supporting our highest needs students and students who are in poverty through Title I and the other title programs. So relative to the amount of money, for instance, that a local school district gets from the state, or even that may generate, on its own, uh, it's not a lot of money total that's coming from the federal government, but it is important because it's supporting, particular student groups, students with special needs, students in poverty. So the Trump administration looks at this and says, okay, we are going to leverage that money that we provide to states and local school districts in order to try to force districts to make decisions that are consistent with the political ideology, of Trump and his supporters. And we all know what that means. Primarily, that means um, creating a public school system that turns its back on LGBTQ students, that frankly turns its back on immigrant students and immigrant families, and that turns its back on the notion of equity itself. That the public school system should be the institution that levels the playing field. The Trump administration doesn't believe in that, and it wants us at the local level and at the state level to turn our backs on those basic principles. And so, what have we seen, from the Trump administration since they came back into power in January of last year? Almost immediately, in fact, I think on day one, the Trump administration started sending out directives to local states and local school districts, making claims about what federal law is, and demanding that local states and local school districts reverse decisions that have been in place for years and years, focused on equity and support and focused on supporting all of our students, to reverse those decisions and I'll just be blunt about it, to begin discriminating against certain groups of students. So right away, the U.S. Department of Education fired off a letter to states and local school districts saying that programs that are based in notions of diversity, equity, and inclusion are in fact a violation of the constitutional rights of students and families, and making a link between the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the K to 12 system with the Harvard admissions case. And, essentially saying the Harvard admissions case means diversity, equity, and inclusion programs nationwide are illegal. And you need to go through and do an analysis of your state and your school district, and anything that smacks of DEI, you need to get rid of. And if you don't, we're going to come and audit you. And ultimately, that audit could result in us pulling your federal funding. That came, I think that might have been day one, from the Trump administration. And what we immediately saw at the State Department of Education at CDE, and what I certainly experienced at San Diego Unified, is local administrators and school board members were scrambling to understand what that meant. So CDE was getting, a barrage of, questions from local superintendents saying, what does that mean? Do we have to get rid of ethnic studies? Do we have to pull the pride flag down from, schools? Do we have to reverse decisions about equitable budgeting that are designed to support students most in need? What does this mean? And what we realized at CDE was, yes, it's important for us to challenge these notions in court when the Trump administration comes and claims that it has the legal authority to take funding away from schools. And we have, and we've consistently done that. We've worked with the Attorney General. We've worked with a coalition of other states, to go to court, and we've generally been successful in blocking, these Trump administration directives. But probably more important than that is we have to continually send guidance to our local districts, that it clarifies what the law is, what the responsibilities of local districts are, and essentially to remind them that, especially in California, um, efforts, strategies, programs that are designed around diversity, equity, and inclusion, are the law in California and are consistent with our values. And when local school boards pursue the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion, they've got every legal right to do that. And the federal government does not have the right to take funding away because local school boards and local districts invest in diversity, equity, and inclusion. Um, I provided, I think we can put it in the chat for people to take a look at. We actually put a web page up at CDE, which is about our responses to these federal directives, that we've seen over the past over a year now from the Trump administration. And we thought that was important because, I said on day one, districts got this, I think they called it a Dear Colleague letter saying you got to get rid of your DEI programs. But that started what really became at least a weekly, set of directives coming from the federal administration to local districts. So you got to audit your entire district strategy and get rid of any illegal DEI programs. Um, you have to ensure that transgender students don't have access to gender appropriate facilities and are prohibited from participating in sports, because allowing transgender students access to appropriate facilities and participating in sports is a violation of the civil rights of non-trans students. And so you got to get rid of them. Um, if you are, as a school district, doing anything to protect your immigrant students and families as we send, armed masked guards into your cities, um, that's an interference of the federal government's right to enforce immigration policy. And we are going to come after you as local school board members if you have sanctuary policies in place. And of course, we're going to pull the funding, from your district if you don't get rid of these sanctuary policies. That threat came early on. And then, of course, beyond just the threats, we've seen actual attempts and by the Trump administration to pull funding that's not consistent with what they call the president's priorities. So early on, we saw grants that support teachers, support teacher pipeline programs that improve the diversity of our teaching force. Those grants were taken away. Grants to support electrifying school buses were taken away. And then what we saw, the biggest attempt by the Trump administration to actually pull funding right at the beginning of last summer, a series of title programs that support summer school, after school, training teachers to support English learners, migrant education, that added up to about $7 billion nationally, about $1 billion in California, that had been appropriated by Congress. The Trump administration sent a letter 2 days before that money was supposed to start flowing to states and local districts, saying it was going to hold that money. It was going to determine whether those programs were consistent with the president's priorities, and at some point in the future would make a decision about whether it was going to release those funds. That's called an impoundment. We felt it was illegal, but it created havoc for many school districts in California because the money was pulled right at the beginning of summer when a lot of summer school programs that was supported by those funds, were starting. And so we did actually have districts that pulled back their summer school programming because that money wasn't released. So what we've seen fairly consistently from the courts is that when the federal government, when the Trump administration attempts to pull back money that has been appropriated by Congress, but that flows to states in formula programs, so special ed, the title programs, it's basically, you know, states, we look at the percentage of students who qualify for those programs, in districts, and that determines how much money you get. Um, the courts have generally said that the Trump administration cannot withhold those funds. When it comes to discretionary funding, and that is like, the teacher training programs, the electric school buses, mental health grants, where the federal government actually, Congress appropriates the funds, but the Department of Education determines, they're competitive grants, districts and states apply for them, the Department of Education has discretion over who gets those grants. The courts have actually held that the Trump administration has the ability to withhold that money. So there's been this sort of, back and forth about which funds actually can be withheld by the Trump administration and which funds have to be released. I think the story of those impounded funds, though, the $7 billion that we saw at the beginning of the summer, is probably the most important lesson for all of us because ultimately that money was released. But it wasn't because a court ordered Trump to release those funds. Eventually that happened, but the money was released earlier because those funds affected uh, school districts and state departments of education, not just in the blue states like California, but in all states. And so within weeks, because members of Congress were hearing from local districts about the impact of withholding those funds, because that political advocacy came from local school boards, local districts, and state departments of education, eventually we had 10 Republican senators sign a letter to the Trump administration requesting for those funds to be released, and those funds were then released. And I point that out, and we saw a similar, on a smaller scale just a couple of weeks ago. The Trump administration claimed it was going to cancel a series of mental health grants throughout the country, and literally within a day reversed its stance and released that money because they were hearing so much backlash to that decision, not just from California and New York and the blue states, but from all states in the country. And the point I think that's so important there is, yes, we need to make use of the courts. We need to legally challenge all of these efforts by the Trump administration to force its agenda on local school districts and on California, and that it can't, just sort of use those federal funds as leverage to do that. So we have to go to court. CDE, we've gone to court again and again and again. We always will. But the political power to push back at the Trump administration actually can be successful. And I would say that in the case of the $7 billion of impounded funds, that really wasn't the result of any organized effort. It was just, school districts and state departments on their own getting in touch with their senators, with their members of Congress, and saying this is a problem. But I think if we actually put together a strong nationwide organizing effort among local school boards, among state departments of education to advocate for things like increased funding for special education. um, I think the story of, the victory of getting those impounded funds released should give us optimism that we can actually win those fights, even in this current, situation where, Congress so rarely stands up to Trump about anything. I know that this is not a partisan group. I will say that the outcome of these midterm elections are going to be extremely important in terms of building our power to push back against Trump's directives. Um, so organizing, across the nation, school board to school board, State Department of Education to State Department of Education, with a strong, focused advocacy message, making sure that races for Congress, um, that we elevate the importance of public education and particularly protecting federal funding for public education become, you know, front and center in those races, and that we as education advocates, local school board members are influencing, those races and making sure that those candidates who get elected are making commitments to protect public education. I actually think that is the most important thing that we can do over the next couple of years while we still deal, with the Trump administration's attempt to impose its ideological agenda on all of us. So, look, if we believe that public schools are the most important institution in protecting democracy, and if we believe that the decisions of local school boards uh, have the most impact in whether we're delivering on that promise of public education. Um, what I think we need to do is we need to commit ourselves to doing what you're doing, trying to have people who sit on those school boards, people who share our values get elected to those school boards, and we need to organize coalitions of school board members who share our values to build the political power that we need to push back against these current attacks from the Trump administration, but more broadly, to push back against the attacks on public education that we've seen for decades now, including here in what's supposed to be the most progressive state in the country, in the fourth largest economy in the world. And yet, um, we have had to fight and scrap for getting our schools and our students and our educators the resources that they need. We need to organize and build our own power to fight for the promise of public education. So I'll stop there, and then I know we want to do some Q&A.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was really, really helpful and very informative. And I hope it answered a lot of questions and concerns that our members have. We do have a couple of very specific questions in the Q&A. And I have a couple of questions myself. So let me get to the members' questions. And we have a question from Lori Van Houten. She says, how has this specifically affected programs, supports, and professional learning around multilingual learners?
Mhm. So, in a couple of ways. So, a big portion of those impounded funds that eventually we were able to fight and get released went to teacher training programs for supporting English learners. And so, of course, that was, the Trump administration zeroed in on those programs. And, what is maybe not surprising, but different, I would say, about this particular brand of conservatism coming from Trump is that I think there used to be pretty strong consensus that we should help first generation English learners become proficient in English, right? I think we had sort of strong consensus around that idea. Um, and so to attack the programs that were designed to actually support English learners become proficient in English just seems to be an attack on English learners themselves. And so, it wasn't surprising to see those programs, included in the money that they attempted to withhold. Money for migrant education as well. These are students who are, going from community to community over the course of a year as their families are, moving primarily in agriculture, um, and making sure that those students have support as they're, going from, school district to school district. Those, of course, were included in the programs that Trump tried to withhold. And again, just seems like why why not support students to be able to thrive academically because they are immigrant students, and so Trump attacks them. So we know that the whole concept of diversity itself is in the crosshairs of the Trump administration. So any kind of program that supports, multilingual education, supports English learners, also supports native English speakers to become proficient in other languages. Again, something that I think we used to have pretty strong consensus around, will come under the notion of not meeting the president's priorities and will be targeted and have been.
Pardon me. Thanks for that. And we have another question from Sherry Simon. And she says, I understand the difference between the direction and guidance coming from the federal government, such as Dear Colleague letter and other kinds of threats, and what is stated in the California Education Code. Her question is, has the state of California said they will fund lawsuits against local school boards should the Trump administration decide to take a local school board to court? Or will it be incumbent upon those school boards to fund these legal battles on their own?
So I mean, I think that's an interesting point. So what we have tried to do with local school districts is say, look, we're going to do a statewide response to these, directives that come from the Trump administration. So rather than expecting district by district by district to do its own response to something like a Dear Colleague letter, we will do a statewide response that represents all school districts in California. And I think that's been appreciated by local districts. Um, then the idea, for instance, again, this threatening letter to local school board members about if you have a quote unquote sanctuary jurisdiction, we're not only going to pull your funding, we're going to come after you personally. They haven't done it yet. Um, but the idea of protecting local school board members who actually stand up and make sure that they're doing the right thing and having that support from CDE, I certainly think that's something that we would support. I know Superintendent Thurman would certainly support that. I think we'd see support in the legislature, for that, to provide, uh, a way of whether it's a sort of funding the specific legal, defense of those school board members, or whether the state of California, representing those local school board members, takes the lead in protecting, school board members in court. I think there would be strong support. We haven't faced the situation yet, but I think there would be strong support in California to do that.
So that sort of goes into my first question is, so when our members go into school board meetings and we ask them to not just appear, we want them to do two things. We want them to be monitoring what's going on in their districts and what
Yeah.
are school board members actually doing? Are they following California laws? And in some of our more conservative districts, particularly, we often have our members who are confronted with school board members who say or might say, well, we have to do this because the federal government has mandated that we do this. What would you suggest that our response be in those kinds of situations for our members?
For being there at the school board meetings or in conversation with the local school board members. Yeah, no, I
Yes.
think that's great. I think the messaging, whether it's like speaking in public comment at the board meeting or just in individual conversations with board members is um, what the Trump administration asserts as federal law is probably not actually federal law, and pay attention to the guidance that's coming from CDE. Because, and again, CDE is very careful about not overstepping its boundaries and making interpretations of law that could be a stretch or that could put local districts in harm's way. Um, but we are very clear about what the law is, and both what California law is and what federal law is. And so if there's any claim, in your case of your question, Kathy, by a conservative school board member that, hey, the Trump administration is saying we need to get rid of DEI, we need to not protect our immigrant students, we need to kick our trans students out of sports because the Trump administration says it's illegal, not to do those things. I think a lot of the messaging should be around um, pay attention to the guidance that's coming from the California Department of Education, and that's your responsibility to stay within that guidance. And I'll give you one example, Kathy, that I'm sure you're familiar with. So in San Diego County, probably the clearest example of a school board that has a majority of, very conservative members is the Grossmont Union High School District. I'm a proud alum of El Cajon Valley High School, which is in the Grossmont Union District. But that's been a conservative board that's been there for years. But, we have legislation AB 49 that was passed last year, which requires every school board in the state to establish a policy that prohibits immigration authorities from entering a school campus without a judicial warrant, and that prohibits, immigration authorities from having access to student records without a judicial warrant. A lot of school boards had adopted those policies back during the first Trump administration, but probably three-quarters of districts in California actually didn't have those policies. And AB 49 says you have to have those policies, and you have to submit those policies to CDE by March 1st. So the one progressive member of that Grossmont Union board, he brought a resolution forward and said, "Hey, state law says we have to, adopt this policy protecting our immigrant students." And he actually got the support of two other members against the sort of the desire of the most conservative members of that board who had kind of run that board for years. And they passed their policy, and they've sent it off to CDE to be in compliance with California law. So, I think it's important for us to say two things to local school board members. One, what the Trump administration claims is the law is probably not the law, and you've got to follow, the guidance of CDE. And number two, what is California law, you have to comply with. And doesn't matter if you don't like it in this case, you don't, want to protect immigrant students, you have to, because that's California law.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. And just as an aside, AAUW California supported AB 49 last year. So
Thank
we're
you.
really thrilled to have that happen. My last question is, you mentioned about the impact that you're having at the level of school boards and the state, talking to legislators and putting pressure on our congressional representatives. What impact on an individual level can our members have? Do they have a voice in this, do you think?
Huge voice, to the degree that, I mean, your members may be the ones that actually organize the school boards, to push back at the federal government and advocate. So it's that coalition of, that your members are bringing those voices of, people who care about our public schools, into that advocacy, network. Extremely important. So for instance, again, I, come back to, again, not meaning to be overly partisan, but we now have, 5 or 6 real swing districts in California, and, that are going to be determined in this year's midterm elections. I would absolutely encourage your members to communicate with candidates who are running for those congressional races and saying, "Hey, are you paying attention to this assault on public education, coming from the Trump administration? And is this going to be a priority of yours, if you get elected?" And that's something that, I think AAUW members, could be very powerful in doing.
Yeah, a lot of our branches are very active in doing candidate forums, and those are excellent questions to be put forward in those forums. So, Richard, thank you again so much for spending your Saturday morning with us and really
Absolutely.
helping our members understand this is so important, such an important topic to the work that we're doing right now. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you
Thank
again
you,
so
Kathy.
much.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. All right, our next speaker. Before I introduce her, I have a fun fact to share with you. Brianna Mullen was an AAUW Tech Trek Scholarship recipient from Mills College, and she served as a camp counselor and dorm mom for the UC Davis Tech Trek. So it's like old home week for Brianna when she comes to speak to us. And many of you have heard her present previously. She has done a couple of presentations for our members. So for those of you who have had the opportunity to hear her before, some of this will be repetitive, but there's so much great stuff in her materials that it doesn't hurt. It never hurts any of us to hear it again. And some of it can be clarified when we hear it the second time around. For those of you who are new to Brianna's presentation, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a longtime educational advocate, policymaker, and community organizer with 15 years of experience working to ensure that vulnerable children have access to liberatory education and healthy communities. A first-generation college student from the Bay Area, she holds dual master's degrees from Stanford in education and public policy, where she was a Knight Hennessy Scholar and the inaugural Global Impact Award winner. Her past roles include policy advisor at the California Department of Education and consultant to the California School Boards Association. She is the co-founder and executive director of the Education Justice Academy and chief education officer at Just Ed Tech, which leverages AI to support school board accountability nationwide. Brianna is with us today in her capacity as a community trainer on school boards for the Public School Defenders Hub, an AUW California partner organization. And in the link that we gave you on to our webpage, to the school board project, we have a link in there to the school Public School Defenders Hub. So if you're interested in learning more information about this great organization that just has a wealth of resources that's accessible to all of our members, make sure you check that out. And Brianna is here today to help our members learn how to effectively monitor school board meetings for compliance with California law. Take it away, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for that introduction. And I managed to find actually a picture of my dorm group from 2017 from the AAUW Tech Trek that I did. This is me with much longer hair and all of my girls here. And, you know, it is really these moments with these kids. You know, one of the young girls in this group came out to me, you know, at the camp at that time. You know, she said, I think I'm having feelings for someone, and these are very confusing feelings, right? And I think that those are the vulnerable moments that we have with kids when we're educators all the time, but the moments that matter so much. And AUW has given me so much support. I think about Richard's statement before about, you know, how kids can really thrive and give back to their communities when they're given those opportunities. And I am definitely one of those kids, and I consider myself a lifelong AAUWer because of the investment that this community gave in me. And so I'm so excited to give back to this community and help you all think a little bit about how do we put into practice those amazing remarks that Richard just gave us about how important it is right now to stand up for our kids in our school boards. I'm wondering if we can pull up my slides. I can also pull them up, but I think. While those are getting pulled up, I'm so excited to be here on behalf of the Public School Defenders Hub. Like Kathy said, they're an amazing organization who offers quarterly trainings. So if you take away from this training that you want to bring more folks into the process, we know that, you know, these school board meetings can feel intimidating, but the whole goal is that this is where democracy is really happening on our local level. And as Richard said, it's really where the most important decisions are going to be made in our schools in the next couple years, because there's guidance coming from left, from right, from you know, the federal government, and of course we know and have been tracking that just, you know, online information is influencing folks on school boards. And so we need really grounded, empirical, and good valued folks like the folks in AUW to show up. So Public School Defenders Hub offers this training quarterly and also offers support and some guidance that I'm going to go through at the end of the presentation. And these slides will be available for you as well. Next slide, please. So today what we're going to work on is how can we really feel courageous to show up to actually monitor these school board meetings effectively? How do we know specific pieces of the ed code that we can stand on and really know support the actions that we're taking to ensure local districts are following the law and protecting students, and understanding the key powers and limitations that school boards have, because there is governance at Gov Code that constrains all local government bodies, and school boards have their own school board policies that they should be following as well. And what do you do when you witness a violation? I'm so excited that we have Richard here, and we can talk about, later the uniform complaint process and the way that you can make a complaint that kind of continues to the state review. And so those are going to be our three outcomes. It's going to be a lot of nitty gritty ed code, but we're going to come back to the fact that we just want you to feel empowered and like you're standing on the right side when you show up to these school board meetings to advocate for our kids and families. Next slide, please. And so, like I said, we're going to go through the school board's role, current rules and laws, and then effective meeting monitoring. And then there's going to be a monitoring toolkit that we'll walk through with support, the Public School Defenders Hub, with the support of Southern California ACLU put together that designed guidance framework for submitting complaints. And I think that a lot of times what we need to understand is we're really just flagging, like Richard was framing, that that California law that is on the books that we know is still standing should be enforced. There's 1,000 school districts in California. And so being able to keep a good eye on whether or not they're following the law is very important. Next slide. Great. Next slide. So we have over 1,000 school boards in California and 10,000 schools. And so they're independent bodies from city and county governments and have their own meetings, often, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights. They can start anywhere from 4:30 and go all the way into the very late evening. I think we should all try and end our meetings earlier so that everyone can kind of participate. But since COVID started, we've seen more meetings be accessible to folks online, which is great. Many districts have kind of pulled back that access afterwards, but many are continuing to offer that online. School boards make really important decisions in these meetings. They not only hire and review the superintendent's contract, they're often confirming the collective bargaining agreement for the teachers and the classified, all the workers that work for the district. They can be settling lawsuits in those board meetings. They can be selling property. They could be making large contracts with local buyers. And so, as we said, majority of the funds that really come to school boards come through the state. And so they provide a huge economic role in our communities. In many communities, school boards might be the largest employer, or the school district rather is the largest employer in a community. And so if there is layoffs of 10 or 20%, there's a double impact, not only to the kids and families and the folks in the school itself, but to the larger community's economic footprint. And so because they're primarily state funded, only that 10% comes from the federal government. It's really about the local decisions about where money is going to be spent and the kind of economic footprint that school board decides to continue. If we lose federal grants on electric school buses, do we still want to make that investment in our local community? Does that affect any local businesses in the area who we're contracting with in order to make that happen? Or does that money go away and now they've lost that grant completely? Those are really kind of in real time decisions that school boards can be making. Next slide, please. Thank you. They also play a really core curriculum authority. So the state has a very specific process in creating frameworks and standards for history, science, math, English language arts. But as Richard mentioned, the Common Core state standards tried to create a national framework that also fits within. But ultimately, school boards at the local level are the people who decide which curriculum, and even more important, which curriculum providers to contract with to provide that material. And we've seen actors try and insert not just religious and regressive ideology in history or social science framework materials and curriculum, but also in math lessons, rewriting the math, material in textbooks and workbooks, so that it, reflects an ideology that is, that reflects that political agenda. And so it's really important that school boards are not only not trying to push that political agenda in the selection of their curriculum materials, but are keeping a keen eye on the material itself, and if the providers that they're contracting with have any regressive ideology that they're inserting into the material. And I think you're going to hear from a great school board member in the Inland Empire later today who has been really a hawk at this. And so I thank her for her service, because it is often asking a lot of school board members, but keeping an eye and making sure that religious ideology isn't inserted in inappropriate places is really important. And then there's very key material ed code requirements around minimum materials. So, whether or not school boards have the ability to provide or comply with state law on the surface, or actually are they robustly providing the material that's needed? We see, particularly for LGBT history and sexual health classes, that sometimes schools are purchasing the materials and then stashing them away and not necessarily teaching them. So we know that there are important on the ground perspectives that are needed from people about whether or not these classes are actually being offered. That's an important part of our monitoring and observing. And then teacher involvement. Ideally, like, teachers themselves are the best people to be selecting curriculum and understanding the kind of materials that best serve their students' needs and learning abilities. And so there is ed code that requires that teachers are part of that curriculum selection process. And there should be, a very clear committee or group of people in that district who's moving through that instructional quality review process. And of course, there are some federal and state monitoring of this process, but a very small group of people are responsible for monitoring, 10,000 schools and 1,000 school districts. So it's really, really important that folks in this group are showing up and able to engage and ensure that the material that you're seeing your nieces, nephews, sons, daughters, kids in your community, grandkids, like, what are they actually engaging with? And does it have an interesting, political bend that it feels doesn't reflect the values or what state law should be. Next slide. And there's, really strong constitutional boundaries for this work, right? We've talked, I think Kathy talked about how quick you were all to act around book banning in particular, and how it violates the First Amendment. Banning discussions on race, gender orientation, clearly have a political ideology that is in line with this administration, but that doesn't reflect the California Constitution. That doesn't reflect the pieces of California Ed Code that talk about protecting folks' non-discrimination based on their gender identity, based on their race, based on their class and ethnicity. And so how do we make sure that those students are receiving their civil rights right now? It's a really important discussion. And so there are obviously different court decisions that are happening, but there is lots of standing law. Just because there is things changing like Richard mentioned around the Harvard case, doesn't mean that it automatically applies to every piece of California law. But we need to make sure that people know that and hold fast to the standing law in our communities, which may look different than other places. I was in Arkansas for my younger siblings' high school graduation, where they finished high school. My family's at Reverse Okie, and there was prayer all during the high school graduation. That kind of shocked me, but they are in a different district court, not the Ninth District Court. And so there are different rulings about prayer at the high school graduation. And so in California, we're in the Ninth District, and it holds right now that there should not be prayer at school events like that. And so it is important that we, our communities, show up and hold that lay of the land true. But we always retain our individual free speech as part of that process. So, we may have other folks in our community that disagree that these laws shouldn't be what are reflected in our schools, and they're allowed to reflect that opinion. And there's many school board members in California that do hold that they don't want schools to be complying with anti-discrimination laws for LGBT or trans students. And that is part of their First Amendment rights that they can reflect. But the institution, the district itself, has to comply with laws as the court has outlined. And so that's what's so important about the guidance that Richard gave, and ensuring that the school district understands what their charge is to serve students. Next slide. So, I think a lot of us have become very familiar with, what this looks like, but in education, it can get sometimes a little trickier, because we've seen these attacks on public education come through a lens of trying to protect children, and trying to ensure that they are receiving a great education. But we also see that they're using certain students and certain curriculum as wedge issues to try and drive parent communities, apart, school communities apart. And we know that, this race-blind rhetoric doesn't address, as Richard talked about before, our migrant students, our immigrant students, our English learner students, our trans students, who all really need very specific supports in this moment to show up and be able to learn effectively and appropriately in the classroom. And so when they're attacking social emotional learning programs, they're really attacking students who need those social emotional learning programs, and students who need those mental health services in order to show up at school. Many of these students are now struggling with, potentially their parents being deported, or just the fear of immigration at this moment is causing immense anxiety for kids and families. And so, if you're 12, 13 years old, having those supports might be the difference between you not coming to school at all. And ultimately, when we're talking about a vast privatization attack on our public schools, being able to ensure that people even show up for school is a big part of a part of the larger battle, because if folks don't have that high school education, they are more vulnerable in the economic market. They'll work for lower wages. There's just a lot of reason to potentially push people out of the public school system and make them more vulnerable and push them into a shadow economy. And we know that the public school system is one of the best places to touch our communities that are really vulnerable, because they want their children to receive a world-class education that California has been famous for. So despite the fact that the rhetoric really centers around protecting our children, I think that the question really needs to be asked, which children are being protected by this agenda and which children really need protection in this moment, because all of our communities have students who are really struggling, and we may not know always who they are. And so how do we show up in these school board meetings and make sure that the students, the families, the parents that can't show up to these school board meetings right now are able to be part of the conversation, and that their needs are part of the conversation, rather than just parents who, frankly, sometimes don't send their kids to the public school, sometimes, who are showing up to these school board meetings and trying to change where these services are going. So it's so, so, so important to be looking out for these buzzwords, but then, leaning on the AAUW materials, some of the Public School Defender Hub materials to push back on this rhetoric and make sure that it's really clear why these students are part of our community, and why serving them is something that we're going to continue doing. Next slide. And so there is some very specific pieces of legislation and ed code that we have up here for you to reference. I think a lot of folks here have a ton of talent in understanding law and public policy, so we knew that you could potentially nerd out on these. But California has taken really expansive steps in the last 20 years to try and protect the civil rights of students in school campuses. And, we need to now actually make sure that those laws on the books become reality. I think we have a very large state and a lot of diverse communities within that state. And showing up and helping folks understand, I think that this group is particularly well suited to help show up and understand that, why do we need social science textbooks that reflect everybody's stories, right? Why is it important that we get to learn about everybody's stories in school? And why is it important that those materials include perspectives of gender diverse stories, LGBT stories, for not just white and Caucasian Californians, but people of color as well, because we know that these students are often struggling to see themselves thriving in our society. And I have a trans sibling in Arkansas, and they really need these kinds of images and representation in front of them to feel like they can have a healthy and thriving future. And so we need to make sure that our schools are places where those students can see themselves thriving in the history books and in all of our lessons and communities. We've seen a huge explosion of student activism around these issues, but it means so much when adults show up and support them. I think that they are really surprised, and often really it's a welcome surprise when they see folks in their community come out and help them create space and create community. And I think I mentioned before, the Education Code 6119 is specifically about sufficient materials that are required to be included. And so if you find that potentially schools are complying with state law around curriculum by only purchasing a certain number of materials, or purchasing them and then hiding them somewhere in the classroom, or that there's just some lack of compliance. I think that these are some of the pieces of EdCode that we want you to have on hand. When we move into the ACLU complaint guide, they can be important reference points for the kind of complaint that you can continue to file. Next slide, please. And so we wanted to go a little bit into the specific rights of LGBT students and staff, because there has been some changes and some different court rulings that have happened that have called into question, particular California laws as the Trump administration has come after school districts. But there are things that hold fast no matter what. And so sometimes we have to go back to the basics, which is really that all students and staff have the right to privacy. And we like to say that privacy is a shield and not a sword. And so that means that you get to protect yourself with privacy, but you don't get to like go into somebody else's business with privacy. And so all LGBT students have the right to privacy around their identity for themselves. They don't have to say anything if they don't want to. Access to affirming mental health and school supports. That's just for all students. They should have access to, mental health supports. And many schools are expanding those kinds of supports right now. And the ability to seek help or file complaints without fear of retaliation, right? So if they're having problems with staff, they have their own rights and process. And they also have the right for safety and non-discrimination, right? So all students have the right to be free of an environment without bullying, harassment, or discrimination based on their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. And schools are legally required to intervene and respond when harm occurs. And that's because they have those civil rights in California. And so those don't go away. And lastly, they have the right to be affirmed and included. So they have the right to be called their chosen name if they ask for it, and pronouns, and participate fully in school activities. And so there's lots of different school activities, that they might want to participate in, but they have that right. And they absolutely still have the right to see themselves in history and curriculum, and that is still part of California state law. So, there's lots of noise and there's lots of rhetoric kind of happening. Obviously, lots of, conversation locally about what this means, but sometimes we have to go back to the basics, which is just that our LGBT students and staff have the same protections that almost everyone does, which is to have privacy, have support, be affirmed, be included, and to be not discriminated based on their identity. And I think that that's really important. I see there was a question about how do we know whether required classes are being taught and whether required materials are being distributed. That's best really seen through, a parent or student or teacher perspective. I think that this is why it's so important to be organizing with folks in the community, because they're going to be really the folks who see the material and what's being handed out. I've organized with Black parents in Chino Valley Unified who really were upset after they saw a lesson come home, and that was what got them organizing. And so it does take kind of that insider knowledge to see, but is an important part of the feedback cycle and showing up to report back to the school board what you're seeing in the classroom happening. Next slide, please. And so we've talked a little bit of this. The library can't restrict materials. We still have to, you can't limit materials on protected groups. And we must act against discrimination. And if we're seeing school districts not do these things, they may actually lose funding. And so the state legislator and governor have threatened to, basically pull funding from school districts who don't comply with these laws. And I think that this is, a well-intentioned incentive to try and keep school districts following the law. Of course, we have to be very careful because I think some agitators at the local level are hoping for this outcome, actually, that school districts will lose more and more resources and kind of continuously defund the public school. So it's so important that we all show up in our communities and make sure our school districts are complying. And folks may have heard recently about the Muhammad versus Taylor case, which is kind of framing an option for parents to opt out of public school instruction that violates the family's religious beliefs. And there was already some allowance within the sexual health curriculum for this for parents, but this expands this opt-out option to all material potentially. This case has been ruled, but the guidance has not been given at it. And so CDE and state will be giving more guidance soon on what that could look like. But until then, it doesn't mean that the school board should pull back on all material, because once again, just because individual parents want to opt out does not mean that the entire community is opting out in that moment. And so thinking about how to structure that opt-out process, so that it is potentially not a spillover effect and allows parents to opt out of huge chunks of the curriculum, because there are still things like the Scopes monkey trial and other things that require that accurate scientific information is taught. Next slide, please. I think we usually pause here to answer any questions, and I think I wanted to check the chat again. And
Brianna, so far we've just had two questions. You've answered one, and the other one was about Mahmoud, which you've just covered. So I think as of this moment, we're caught up on our questions from our members.
Okay, well, let's move forward. And if folks have more questions, they can drop them in the chat. So we're in the next part of this, we're going to go over how do we actually take this knowledge, all of this head stuff, and move it into action, showing up to school board meeting minutes or meeting, giving public comment, and maybe what I would encourage, even meeting and communicating and engaging with your school board members outside of the meeting, because that's really where building a strong relationship can change the course and direction of the district. Next slide, please. So we're going to go over some of the procedural processes that school boards use, including quorums, remote voting, the board bylaws. I talked about the fact that there's both Gov code that governs school board meeting minutes as public agencies and public bodies, but also that they have and adopt their own board policies in their policy manuals. And then also some of the allowances that school boards can use in emergency actions, because it does lower some of the standards for public meetings. And we have all experienced different emergency actions in the last couple of years, but they should not be inappropriately used. So we'll go over some of the conditions that they should be used and not used. Next slide. So closed session is often the portion of the meeting that the school board meets without the public involved. And so school boards usually put this at the beginning of their meeting. Like I said, might start at like 4:30, 5 o'clock, maybe 5:30, right before, so that school folks from the public can join the public portion right afterwards. It's still required that the school board post the agenda. It has the same rules, and there is still required to be public comment on that agenda. What the public is not allowed to participate is the discussion that the board has about that agenda item. And the type of items that can be discussed in closed session are things regarding litigation, things regarding compensation specifically for labor and or the superintendent. But that doesn't mean that all of those discussions should be happening in closed session. There should be an evaluation discussion happening for the superintendent, a report out to the public, and the same for labor to the public, and employee complaints and student expulsion cases are often done in closed session to protect the privacy of the student. But there, like we said, there still needs to be a public comment period. So even if the expulsion case for the student is in private, there's often a public comment period where folks might come, a teacher may come and give a comment on behalf of the student, and then particularly in that closed session process, there is potentially decisions making on whether or not, often the most important decision that the school board makes, which is the hiring and firing of the superintendent. And so the public may comment on that hiring decision in that public comment period. That's often when the board hears, on whether or not there was a process between multiple candidates or a firm that was hired. They may hear from that firm in closed session, but the public can comment on the process right beforehand. What we don't want to see in closed session are discussions regarding, you know, processes for the district to adopt curriculum, processes for the district to change all of the district policies. District policy discussions should be happening in open session. What we have sometimes seen is basically districts using this closed session to strategize with outside law firms, which is hard to know exactly what's going on in those discussions, but we can still ask and require that there is an agenda and that all decisions in the closed session are reported out afterwards. Next slide, please. And so as we discussed, it's personnel matters, labor negotiations, pending litigation are all things that are allowed to be discussed in closed session. There still must be an agenda. There still must be public comment allowed. And for reporting out, there has to be disclosures of action taken. Documents can be available on request. So you can request items that were presented in closed session. If it has to do with anything that has to do with personnel matters or pending litigation, they can deny the request. But sometimes, after the fact, after the decision was made, you can request the closed session items. And so we are often, it requires working and understanding with a school board member who's actually participating in those discussions to hopefully ensure that there's good accountability and fiduciary monitoring in those discussions. That's why it's so important to have good school board members on our local boards. Next slide. And, when we look at how to protect our school boards from making these kinds of decisions inappropriately, we want to lean back on our ed code, our gov code, because if they're making decisions in closed session about curriculum or strategy around how to get around state law, it's very hard to know if that's happening. And so we want to make sure that we're seeing, sometimes we don't know what's happening in closed session, but we do know what's happening in open session. And so we do want to see that in open session that the right discussions are happening about, the curriculum and material aligning with the instructional goals of the district, right? If we want to see students improve their literacy scores, how are we supporting the students who need to increase their literacy scores? What is the curriculum we're using? Is it aligned? Thank you, Kathy. Next slide, please. And so when we're showing up to meetings, we want to document as much as we can, take our own notes. Sometimes these meetings can sound like there's really minuscule decisions being made, but then maybe months later you realize kind of the impact those decisions have had on your community, and you need to go back and look at them. And so looking up the agendas and the votes, reviewing your upcoming agenda. Most school boards use either a board doc system or a assembly system where you can log on onto their website, look at their most recent agenda, look at their most recent minutes, see what the votes were taken. And find out what actions they have taken in the past, and is this direction of the school board a new direction? Did it change after a new majority of board members joined in the fall? Because there could be restrictions on their ability to immediately change around curriculum decisions. It costs a district about $250,000 to adopt a new curriculum. And so, these decisions if they have political ideology at their heart, can also have huge fiscal consequences for the district. And so making sure that we're a good use of the very limited state funds that we do get is so important. And of course, we're going to walk through a uniform complaint filing. Next slide. And so there are times where, you may realize that there has been a violation and you want to take action, but it feels either too big, too overwhelming, or really you might need help to take the next step in action and actually filing a complaint against districts. And those times might happen when there is voluminous materials, if there's complex record requests, if you're trying to request something in closed session, if you're trying to understand something that might be protected by one of the privacy laws. FERPA protects student privacy. HIPAA protects all health information, which schools have more and more of these days. And so you may need to consult other support services, and we're going to give you a list of some of those folks that can help you out when you're doing that. Next slide. And meetings really require that the agenda have multiple steps in order to be a legitimate meeting that is posted and complied with. And so often this is the most common Brown Act violation that we see really comes from meeting agendas that are inappropriately posted, the timeline is inappropriately posted, or there's content discussed in the meeting that was not part of the original agenda. And so regular meetings must have their agendas posted 72 hours beforehand. Special meetings must have their agendas posted 24 hours beforehand, and it must be publicly accessible, and a description of all items must be on the agenda. Items could be listed in consent agenda, which essentially means that they're not going to be discussed in the main meeting, or on action and discussion. And so that's usually how agenda items are split. And so if there is a discussion or a vote happening in a board meeting that is not properly agendized, say that there is a meeting and discussion about the types of curriculum providers that the school is considering moving into contract with, and then all of a sudden there is now a vote on hiring a consultant to come in and make a recommendation for that curriculum provider, and that was not properly agendized, that can be an illegal Brown Act violation. And so that's why it's so important to come monitor, take notes with what you're seeing with your own eyes. Next slide, please. There are remote meeting allowances, like I said, that COVID allows. It allows board members to call in occasionally, but that still requires that the public is able to participate, that there is an agenda that is made available and available to the public. But I'm hopeful that these hybrid policies will actually help, folks be able to call in and participate digitally more often, which I think is more accessible for parents and families. Next slide. And, the other thing that's so hard, we talked about closed session being hard to monitor. The other piece that's hard is, well, how do we make sure that folks are not making decisions out of these public meetings, which is something that we're afraid of as folks kind of have an ideology that they might be trying to represent. And that really comes from these serial meetings that folks can have by having conversations outside of the boardroom. So we always want to monitor and see, are board members having these conversations, attending conferences and seminars together, going to social events? They shouldn't be discussing district business, and they shouldn't be strategizing together about district items that are on the board agenda or could be on the board agenda. Next slide. So how do we find our board agendas? We go online, we can look for the meeting room door, we can request it via email or mail, and you can make a standing request so that it's constantly sent. A lot of these systems have like email signups that you can send so that it's sent to your email. And look up your local board bylaw 9322 on meetings and agendas to really understand what is your local school district's policy in creating the meeting and agenda. It'll tell you who is creating the agenda, how to request potentially an agenda item as a community member that's sometimes available, how much time the public gets to give public comment is all going to be found in that 9322 and all the rules for giving public comment. Next slide. So I talked earlier before, we're in the 9th district, so we're not allowed to give prayer in public school board meetings. Invocations are allowed. We talked a little bit about action and discussion items. A discussion item should not have a vote attached to it. It's just something that's being discussed. An action item has a vote attached to it, may also have funding attached to it. Public must access the agenda 72 hours before a regular meeting, 24 hours for special and emergency meetings, which are natural disasters and shootings. That's also going to be found in your board bylaws, which are the in meetings and agendas on what are the allowable special emergencies. And there is Gov code right here on some of that special emergency meetings, because these apply not just to school boards, but to also all local government agencies. Next slide. So, we want to make sure that these agendas aren't sneaking in other topics, that there isn't dramatic items being changed on from votes, and that they're not sneaking in something that wasn't publicly discussed. The transparency is key, and the Brown Act really is focused on that key transparency. And call out improper procedure guidelines immediately. As soon as it's called out, the board basically you can prove later in court that the board took a legal action. Next slide. And so what does it look like to give effective board monitoring? Well, it looks like attending meetings in person, hopefully, or online if you can, documenting and taking detailed notes, making sure that you know that you have the right to record meetings, and bring other folks to the meeting. It's always more fun when you have a friend. I like to go to these school board meetings and bring a friend and bring some snacks and take notes and really try and understand how the community is learning about the process, because it's so important to make sense of it with others in real time. Next slide. Most boards give 3 minutes for standard speaking, and you are not required to give your name or your information when you're giving public comment. Next slide. Our best practices for public comment are really focusing on the issues, avoid personal attacks on the school board members themselves or anybody else in the community, prevent arguments, give facts. I think this community is so centered in information and providing why it's important. And I want to wrap up here to just say that, don't feel intimidated by anything that is happening in this space, because it is your right to show up to the school board meeting and offer these comments that reflect your community's values and your own values. I know we're going to offer some time for comments and questions, and I just want to say that there is a great guidance from ACLU Southern California on filing these complaints when you need the support. Kathy, what are the questions that we have?
All right, we have 3 or 4 questions here. One of our members, Cornelia, would like you to comment on another buzzword. Oh, she said, she makes the comment. There's another buzzword phrase around parent choice and right to know, et cetera. These are terms that we're hearing, we all know we're hearing frequently. Recent casualties are teachers affected and affected students demanding that a teacher notify a parent if a student expresses any behavior or confides in that teacher regarding the student's gender identity. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, my favorite thing comes from a civil rights State Department worker says privacy is a shield and not a sword. So, students retain their right to privacy. You could imagine that if a student, came up and said that they had an illness, that wouldn't be something that they'd necessarily disclose to anybody else either. I'm not saying that their gender identity is an illness, but there's lots of privacy requirements that students have. And so parent choice is something that can be called out, regarding curriculum, and that's part of the process. But the student has their own right that's different than the curriculum restrictions that we're discussing in Mohammed.
Great. This question is from Jeannie Bennett. It's not entirely within your bailiwick, but if you know, you can answer this. She wants to know what percentage of funds come from the state of California.
Yeah, so the state is the majority funder of public schools. It's about 85% of the public school funding comes from the state. And it is drawn up through property taxes, through the local control funding formula. But it is the main driver of funding. And so I think that that's where we really need to hold schools compliant with state law, or they could lose much, much, much more funding than if they didn't comply with federal law.
Great. That's really a good thing to know, I think. And Karen Feeney is asking, can you please expand on the restrictions regarding a board not changing curriculum immediately after a new board member is added? How long a period of time has to pass?
Yeah, so that's such a great question, Karen, because what we've seen is there's specific laws regarding basically both hiring and firing the superintendent and curriculum adoption that were put in place so that new board majorities can't immediately come in and flip the district and make very expensive decisions basically for the district. I don't know the exact period of time. I will look it up and put it in the chat afterwards because it's in the slide deck. But either way, if you're seeing that happen, it's definitely a red flag to pay attention and monitor those decisions from that board because like I said, it's $250,000 to adopt one curriculum for a mid-sized school district. If your district is bigger, it could be more expensive. And that's just for a math curriculum. If they tried to do it for a bunch of curriculum, it could be a very expensive decision.
Thanks. And then our last question comes from Karen Frank. She wants to know, do you have to announce you are recording the meeting beforehand?
You do not have to announce that you are recording the meeting beforehand. You're a member of the public. It's a public meeting. You're allowed to record it. And as long as you're not disturbing the proceeding of the meeting, by basically interrupting the course of the meeting and what's happening, you are well within your rights to do so. You're not allowed to record during closed session is the only restriction.
Great. Thank you so much. So my job today is to be the taskmaster, and I'm really trying to keep us on time because we have so much to cover. So I had to cut Brianna off a little bit. She is so knowledgeable. She knows so much, and she has so much great information for us. Her slides will be available. They will be posted on our webpage in the public policy section. In the school board project section of the public policy website. And thank you so much, Brianna. You always bring us so much great information. Also, as part of our school board project toolkit, all of the laws that Brianna referenced are kind of spelled out there for you in more detail. And they're also included in the script, the sample scripts that we prepared that you can use when you attend school board meetings so that you have a little bit more information about exactly what those laws are and how they apply. So again, thank you so much, Brianna. We really appreciate you helping us out every time we call on you. And you've just really given us a lot of great info. So because we've kind of had our heads jammed full with all this information from Richard and Brianna, we're going to take a little bit of a break here. It's 10:50. I'm going to give you a chance to get up and stretch and walk around and grab a cup of tea or a Coke or whatever suits your fancy. And please be back right at 10:55. You don't want to miss. I'm encouraging you all to make sure you come back. You don't want to miss our panel presentation we're going to be talking about in the real world. We've had from Richard and Brianna, we've had a lot of factual kind of information, but our panelists are going to talk about what it looks in the real world and how students, parents, and school board members are being impacted by what's going on and how you can make a difference. So now I've talked for a minute, so your 5 minutes is now extended to 10:56. We'll see you then.
In preparation for the panel discussion, Nancy, Ariel, and Lisa, when we get started, you can turn your video and your microphone on so that I can spotlight you.
Ariel, I see that you have joined us, so welcome. Are you all three ready? You can unmute. Any last minute questions or concerns, or you all ready to go?
Kathy, are you going to moderate? Do you want to be on screen?
I do, yeah. Yeah, I'll be asking each of them questions, so.
Am I supposed to go on camera when we start up again?
Who's asking that?
Nancy,
Oh, yep, there you are.
should I stay?
Yeah, yeah, the four of us will stay. Because
Okay.
we having kind of a back and forth with, I have specific questions for each one of you, and then some that will kind of, I'll have you all answer.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Everything that's been brought up today, they're doing on my board, plus some. There's actually things that haven't been brought up.
Yeah, well, I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about those. So
Yeah.
I want to say I'm glad you made it back safely.
Yeah, it was 4 degrees when I left yesterday. When I landed in LA, it was 80. Like, yeah, I got stuck in the snow in front of my aunt and uncle's house
Yeah,
too.
you were telling us last night.
Yeah, a neighbor helped me. I was going to call AAA. That could have taken a long time with everything going on, but she started. She goes, "I'll get my stuff and help dig you out." And it looked like the snow was only an inch or two deep, so I still don't. There must have been something that keeping my tires stuck besides being from California. I think I need to clean my thing.
Don't go far. We're going to start in a minute.
I need to clean my hair. I'm gonna get some Windex. Looks a little blurry.
Oh, I get so nervous before these kinds of things. I'm always like terrified what I'm prepared is not correct and what have you. So I'm just
Yeah, I
I'm
have a
sure
problem with.
nobody else goes through that, Lisa. I'm sure.
Yeah, but sometimes you have to just kind of go with the flow and
Yeah.
If I over prepare, then the question will be a little different and I have to adjust. So
Yeah,
anyway.
you'll all be fine. So, Sandy, are we back on air?
Well, we don't have any way of turning people off, so you can start whenever you want.
All right.
I will cut out the intermediate session when I do the video.
All right. Thank you so much, and welcome back, everyone. So we're going to start our panel discussion. This segment will consist of a discussion about challenges facing our school boards, and more importantly, how all of you, our members, can assist them. When the School Board Project Committee was talking about putting this together, we really decided we wanted to give it a positive slant of how can we be partners with our school boards? How can we support them, and how can we help them do the best work that they can on behalf of our students, which is what we all really care about. So our panelists are going to give us hopefully some clues about how we can do that. They're going to share insights on these issues from 3 different perspectives. Ariel Bustamante is going to help us understand the ways our LGBTQ plus youth are harmed when school boards push or adopt repressive policies, and why it is so important that they have champions like AAUW members fighting for their right to learn in a supportive environment. Ariel is a former Liberty Hill leader to watch, and American Bar Association panelist with over 15 years of experience working to uplift the needs of LGBTQ plus youth with nonprofits, including GSA Network, the Liberty Hill Foundation, ACLU of Southern California, and now she's with the Los Angeles LGBTQ Center. She has trained thousands of professionals serving diverse LGBTQ plus populations, and as senior manager of capacity building, Ariel manages initiatives including training, coaching, technical assistance, consultation, and public advocacy focused on improving the safety, well-being, and permanency of LGBTQ plus youth. Ariel often incorporates her lived experience as a former youth experiencing homelessness, exposure to the foster care system, sexual exploitation survivor, and resource foster parent into her work, including her distinction as an equity and compliance expert for the State of California Department of Education's statewide LGBTQ plus task force and the California Department of Social Services Federal Families First Prevention Services Act. That's a mouthful. And that's an advisory committee. Ariel attended Green Mountain College and self-designed her area of study, which was inequality and oppression studies. So, and often left out of these discussions are the parents and how they fit into the bigger picture. We all support the rights of parents to have a say in their children's education, right? But these days, parents' rights is taking on a whole new meaning. That is the rights of some parents to impose their personal beliefs and values on an entire school district. Lisa Gross is going to help us understand what parents are hearing, what they're thinking, and what they're worrying about. Lisa serves on the California State PTA Board of Managers. She has also served as immediate past president and current board member of the 32nd District PTA, which represents all of Contra Costa County, and a board member and past president of the San Ramon Valley Council of PTAs, and is a current president of the Monte Vista High School PTSA. Lisa holds both a Master of Science and a Doctor of Philosophy in Clinical Psychology, with specialized training in neuropsychology, and she is passionate about advocating for the health, safety, and well-being of all children and their families. And in addition, she's a member of the Danville Alamo Walnut Creek AUW branch. Last but certainly not least, we have a real live board member with us today, and she is going to talk to us about the challenges, not just in the abstract, but as someone who is living them as a minority of one and on an extremely conservative board. Nancy Young is a trustee on the Board of Education for Murrieta Unified School District. She was a high school foreign language teacher and currently works for the County Office of Education as an induction coach, mentoring new foreign language teachers to help them clear their credentials. Nancy earned a BA degree in French and German with a minor in business administration while studying abroad in Germany and France. She also holds an MA degree in curriculum and instruction from Concordia University in Irvine. All right, let's get started, ladies. And I'm going to start with Ariel. Hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us. Are you muted? Are you muted? Because we're not hearing you. Try again. You're still on mute. It doesn't say mute, but we're not hearing you.
Yeah.
You
I
may
don't
be
know.
muted on your computer versus on Zoom.
Yeah. See if you can turn up the sound on your computer.
While you're working on that, you're gonna try it now. Oh, you're gonna call in. Okay. All right. While you're working on that, then we will. I'll set your questions aside for a minute, and we'll talk to Lisa a little bit. So, Lisa, tell us a little bit about your work on the California State PTA Board of Managers. What is a Board of Managers? What do you do?
Okay, I serve on the California State PTA Board of Managers. I sit on a commission on, what do I sit on a commission on? I forget these things. On health and wellness and safety for our children. And as part of these commissions, we come up with ideas. We reach out and partner with schools and units, and we support students and community well-being. We are nonpartisan, so we will advocate on the issues around health and safety and wellness. We will advocate around issues on like the immigration issues that we are currently facing. We provide leadership on these issues for California. And we help people who work on resolutions, which give us the authority to advocate in Sacramento on various issues. We need permission from the state to advocate, and these resolutions that are passed by the California State PTA allow us to go out there and advocate. And a great example right now is on immigration, and really talking about how when immigration enforcement occurs near schools, and the dangers that that presents for our children and for our families. And that's a brief summary. I could go on and on.
That's a lot. You've also worked on several local PTA boards, as we just heard in your intro. Would it be safe to say that you have had over the years substantial contact with both school board members and parents?
Absolutely. I'm actually really proud that both in my own school district and in our county office of education, PTA gets to partner with the with school board members. They are absolutely wonderful and work very closely with us as liaisons. They attend our meetings. They share updates. They make themselves available to the families that we work with, and most are willing to meet individually in small groups, discuss whatever the community concerns are. And I get to speak with parents all the time, informally, or when strong concerns arise, people often decide to call the PTA president. And it's a really great advantage that I have that I get to share accurate information with the families because of the access to school board members and administrators, especially now because there's so much widespread information on social media and all of the political volatility. So I guess I can't emphasize how important it is for parents to build and maintain positive relationships with their school board members.
So what do you see, what are you seeing and hearing as the issues that parents are most concerned about right now?
Right now, child safety is the top concern. Parents want to know, we all want to know our children are safe every single day when they go to school, from physical safety, gun violence, fentanyl, bullying, health issues, and of course, the immigration enforcement. Families worry about if their children feel safe and included. The parents of our LGBTQ plus community, they want assurances their kids are safe at school in bathrooms, locker rooms, athletics. We hear from Jewish families concerns about anti-Semitism, Muslim families about Islamophobia, and there's continual concern about racism and bullying. Also, a growing concern, which we've seen over the last 5, 6 years over mental health, increased stress, anxiety. The impact of technology is a big one too, particularly AI. We've had incidences with deep fake pornography, students using AI in inappropriate or unsafe ways, such as a therapist. And some of the concerns shift over time and they do reflect the broader divisions that we're seeing in society. Things like library books and student confidentiality around gender identity in the districts I work in are less prominent than in recent years. However, transgender participation in sports remains really highly charged, despite the really small number of affected students. I mean, they estimate it's around 10 in the state of California, with 800,000 students involved in athletics. Parents continue to care deeply about the quality of public education, the test scores, the learning loss, college admissions, and how challenging that's become in more recent years. So those are a few of them.
Yeah, so the kinds of things that parents have always been concerned about with their kids and their students, but now we're in such a politically, as you mentioned before, such a politically charged and volatile environment with all of these wedge issues that Brianna was talking about as well. How are parents responding to those issues?
Parents are showing up at school board meetings when there's a big issue. They're reaching out to their local PTAs, asking for support, and who do I talk to? And that's really one of the advantages that, like I mentioned earlier, is I can connect the parents with school board members or with an administrator so that they can get the support they need. But parents are showing up. They're talking amongst each other. They're talking on social media. And sometimes the information is not as accurate as we would like it to be.
So you're seeing a lot of misinformation
Absolutely.
circulating. We in earlier talks you and I have had, I had an opportunity to share with you this brochure that our committee put together on public education is not putting our children at risk, and it's an information guide for concerned parents to try to counter some of this information. You had a chance to review that?
I did. I did.
Do you think that's a helpful tool for our members?
I think it is. It's a helpful tool amongst many other tools. I think it's fantastic when you can put out a tool like that and there's a starting place, and it helps them reach out and connect with the right people and to advocate in the right ways, the ways that are going to be productive.
Great. And so for our members out there, I just want to let you know that brochure is also available on our website, the one that we dropped in the chat earlier. You can find that in the School Board Project Toolkit, and it's downloadable, and you are encouraged to download those and take them with you to school board meetings. So also in earlier conversations we had, you mentioned that you work with the student panels. Can you tell us what those are?
We partner with our school districts to speak with students at various events so that the adults in the community can hear directly from the kids and how they are experiencing school and the current issues affecting their lives. These are probably some of the most insightful and valuable panels because the kids will tell us what they're concerned about. And
what do they tell you?
Well,
what are you hearing?
what's really interesting to me is that what the adults often see as important is not necessarily in alignment with what the students feel. Um, the students consistently raise issues around things like cell phone policies on campus, the use of AI in classrooms. In a focus group recently with middle school students, they actually mentioned more stress and anxiety around college admissions, and these are 6th through 8th graders that we met with. The academic pressure from parents not knowing how to tell their parents that they're stressed about school. Fear of disappointing parents was probably the biggest issue that these kids brought up. And now yesterday we saw large groups of students walking out of school and standing up against the recent ICE action. So we know that that's important to them as well. The kids will speak very candidly with us about ongoing racism, sexism, bullying, anti-Semitism. And it's interesting that these concerns closely align with some of the recent legislative actions we've seen at the state level, like the Phone Free Schools Act, expanded mental health supports for our kids. and the new requirements around inclusive and safe school facilities. So.
So from your perspective, what do you see as the greatest challenges to school boards?
For school boards, wow. The school board members have a huge job. I think it's balance. It's a lot of balancing the data-driven information that we have and making decisions based on the facts, yet also making the constituents, the parents, everybody, all the stakeholders feel heard. The move over the last, I want to say, maybe decade of electing school board members based on areas instead of at large really complicated the questions of representation. Even though we know the board members ultimately are supposed to serve all students and families, we find sometimes when in recent years when a board member is elected from, I want to say, use the right language, a more conservative area, sometimes that will have a huge impact, and that can be a challenge for the rest of the school board in some cases. They face challenges, in some cases, an uninformed electorate because there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of polarization, national politics on our local issues, everything from Title IX and immigration to the curriculum. We're not hearing as much about library books at the meetings I've been attending, but that was huge for a long time. And that was hard to negotiate. DEI coordinated and well-funded campaigns that we've heard a little bit about this earlier today. They're really framed in parental rights, and it undermines the diversity initiatives and being really inclusive with all of our kids. Conflicts that they have to negotiate, which we learned a lot about this morning, California policy and federal policy. And at the same time, there's all of those big issues like school finance, which for right now in California, there's a lot of issues with school finance and declining enrollment, chronic absenteeism in some areas, and that falls upon the board because that directly impacts the financial state of our districts. Then, of course, there's teacher shortages and labor negotiations. And I guess I really believe that most school board members really do an exceptional job showing up every day and really hearing from our students and from our families and intertwining that with the job they're charged with.
Great. I'm going to move on to RL at this point. Are you with us vocally?
I am. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Great.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us as well. And I'm going to just segue right out of my last question to Lisa and ask you about, well, go ahead and give us a brief overview of your work in this space and what does the fight look like at the school board level in the area that you work in?
Yeah. Well, very, very happy to be here with you all today. Lisa, I think you teed me up very well and excited to hear what you have to say, Nancy, and what's happening in your region. But my work for the past, almost 20 years has been working with LGBTQ plus or lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and questioning young people and their peers and the adults that support them in schools and outside of schools. And in my work in particular at the ACLU and now at the Los Angeles LGBT Center's National Out for Safe Schools program, we are really working to empower school districts across the country to make sure that queer and trans young people are safe and that they have great outcomes in the school setting, that they have the supports outside of the school space. And in particular, in California right now, we know that we are at a really critical juncture in this national climate as sort of a model state. We've often been a model state in laws and policies, but unfortunately we know that implementation is often where we lack, enforcement and support. And so a lot of our work these days is mobilizing around contentious school board items that are coming up. In particular, I think, Lisa, you named a few of those, whether it's around student safety and athletes being able to participate, whether it's curriculum or book bans, but making sure that not only are school districts following the letter of the law, but that on the ground, students and families are able to get the education that they are, entitled to.
And what in this work, I would imagine you encounter a great deal of misinformation that is being put out there in your arena. What kind of misinformation do you come up with most frequently, or do you encounter?
Yeah, I mean, we are at a place, an unprecedented time where, in particular, transgender and non-binary people are such a topic of conversation, and unfortunately, a lot of that conversation is based in misinformation, stereotypes, and other just inaccuracies, and a lot of that is being perpetuated right by elected officials or other people in positions of authority that, for the average family member, for the average community member, they're going to take those things as fact. So when we run into challenges, for example, around student athletes and participation in sports, there's a lot of really, really harmful rhetoric that doesn't just harm transgender and non-binary young people, but it harms every single young person who is hearing that rhetoric, who is a part of that, narrative around the health and well-being, around the bodies, which frankly is really also just kind of creepy. Let's just name that, right? Like the fact that we are so fixated on children's bodies is a really bizarre time to be a part of. So that's definitely kind of top of mind. And then I think forced outing is another big one that we're paying attention to. We've had a lot of different lawsuits happening here in the state of California. There's a federal lawsuit that's active right now, and there's been a lot of great opinions coming out of the Ninth Circuit around forced outing policies. And then I think curriculum bans and book bans in general, right? It crosses so many other intersections of communities. And knowing that we are seeing, again, things like free speech and diversity and just, the whole premise of public schools and public education really being undone on an almost daily basis, it feels like.
So, and what are your responses to some of this misinformation?
So I really want to emphasize, in the kind of organizing world, what we talk about as the movable middle. I know how easy it is when we are hearing misinformation, when we are hearing at times even violent rhetoric coming from our communities, and especially as adults, as parents, as, invested community members, how much we want to protect young people and we want to try to counter that negative messaging. And the reality is, right, a lot of the folks, especially in some of these districts that have become sort of newsworthy, those are not folks that we are going to move along with us at this point in time, right? And so our efforts are generally best spent on the folks who we can bring along with us, the folks who are open to maybe kind of hearing personal stories, receiving accurate, information, and maybe starting to think a little bit more about what that means for them and what that means for their community. So in Chino Valley, for example, we were doing some deep canvassing. Our incredible organizing team and volunteers were doing deep canvassing in preparation for that school board race, going door to door and having conversations with potential voters about what was on the ballot, about, policy trends and things that they were hearing about, and making sure that they were empowered with accurate information. Because we were going door to door, of course, we ran into folks who absolutely didn't want to have that conversation, but we also had some really powerful conversations with folks who either had no idea what was going on. Again, I think sometimes people forget, they can vote on school boards whether or not they're a parent or a caregiver, right? And then sometimes we have the opposite, right? We mobilize folks who are so disconnected but are mobilized to vote, and we can get into that at another time, right? But I think that is an example, right, where we've made some strides. We are a nonprofit, so we can't endorse candidates, right, in political issues, but we can absolutely empower voters with accurate information, and that really has been a big push of ours. One of the resources I'm going to drop in the chat for everyone is our 2025-26 school year toolkit. We drop one every year. We'll be dropping one sometime around the summers in preparation for the next school year. But this is something that we created over the past several years to empower all audiences. Our first years, it was focused on educators and the adults in the education setting. And then we realized there was such a need and an ask for students to have accurate information, for invested community members who maybe don't have children in schools but care about these issues to better understand them and better respond to that misinformation.
And how is this in the real world? How is this misinformation and these in many cases outright discriminatory policies or push for discriminatory policies against our LGBTQ plus youth? How has that impacted students? What are you seeing and hearing?
Yeah, so at least a couple times a week, we are getting calls from students or concerned, teachers, caregivers who are working with young people and are dealing with a situation on their local campus where harassment and discrimination has become the norm, where a young person has been outed and is afraid to come back to school, where, in particular, youth who are transgender or non-binary are being doxxed, and even where supportive faculty members, supportive districts, we're seeing often that being the case as well. And I think in particular, I know Bianca was talking about, Brianna was talking about the Mahmoud case, right? And I'm hearing that a lot as well from staff and faculty, that there is this fear to be seen as a supportive, in compliance, really, staff or faculty member is coming at the cost of people's personal safety at this point. A.B. Hernandez is probably the most prominent example in California, transgender girl, track star, incredible young woman who, like many other teenagers, right, is wanting to compete, wanting to have great college prospects, do something she loves, and has been met with, in many cases, violence. She and her family and her supporters have been met with violence when she has attempted to go to track meets throughout the state. And I also just want to remind people, too, that we have these big examples, but we have to remember that every time a student, a young person sees these things on the news, sees these arguments happening at school board meetings, sees protesters outside of their campus, whether or not they belong to that group, right? Like even when we're talking about things like ICE raids and that lack of safety, that collective trauma is real for students. And so there are the students who are directly impacted, there are the families who are directly impacted, but every time a young person in a classroom is bullied and there's no intervention, that also sends a message to every other young person who is observing that.
Excuse me. I'm just going to ask you to, for some of our members who might not know what doxing is, can you just describe that?
Sure. Yeah, so doxing is when somebody essentially takes your private information, such as your private home address, your work address, other ways to contact you, like your phone number, your email, your social media, and makes that information public. And we've seen examples of that for really big, elected officials in an attempt to sway and kind of have it, but it's very different, right, for folks who are choosing to be in the public eye. And again, not endorsing that by any means, but there's a different sort of choice that an adult makes to be in the public eye, and nobody deserves to have their privacy violated that way. But when we are taking children, right, we are taking minors' information and making that publicly online, and many times calling for specific actions towards that child, we've gone to sort of this whole nother unprecedented realm. It's no longer community action, it's no longer visibility, and it's violence.
Exactly. So Nancy, you're someone who has just chosen to put yourself in the public eye as a member of the Marietta School Board. Um, can you tell us a little bit about your district and the makeup of your board?
Well, our district is ranked #1 academically in Riverside County. This area is quite diverse. There is no racial majority. There's also no political majority. Um, the board, well, basically what happened is this pastor, Tim Thompson, 412 Church, who's aligned with Bob Tyler from Advocates for Faith and Freedom, orchestrated the takeover of both Murrieta and Temecula. We had a very reasonable board, but they were heavily funded and people did not understand how organized they were. So I ended up in a 2-3 minority with somebody who was already on the board. Um, there was one man who was, I can't exactly call him a swing voter. If you could keep the focus on money, he often voted with us. Anything dealing with race or gender identity, he would vote with them. He lost his seat to somebody much more extreme in the other direction. My ally lost her seat to somebody whose only focus is targeting the LGBTQ community. She was coming into board meetings, flailing her arms, and how dare you not contact every parent if there's a trans kid on campus. They spread a lot of disinformation about their opponents, which is why my ally lost her seat. But we had a Moms for Liberty candidate, a homeschool parent who'd never had any connection to public schools whatsoever, who was one of those people that won a seat. Um, we managed to replace her with somebody reasonable who was allied with me. She ran into work complications and resigned, which left me in a minority of one. They appointed one of their allies, one of the ones who went door to door spreading disinformation. Members of the public filed a petition because you can have an appointed board member removed if you get enough signatures. They got more than double the amount of signatures. She had to vacate her seat. So now I'm in a 3-1 minority. They're going to add it.
You're the one.
I'm the one. Oh,
You're the
yeah.
one. So
And
what has that experience been for you, being a minority
um,
member on a conservative board?
it's been extremely stressful. They've passed 2 outing policies. During the first one, we had all these people come in from other cities. Almost nobody was from Murrieta. They paid Chloe Cole $5,000 to speak at our meeting. She gets paid $5,000 per engagement if you don't know who she is. But
Yeah, I don't think our members did. Who are you
she's
talking about?
a detransitioner. So apparently she identified a born female, identified as male, wanted to have her breasts removed. Her parents doctor shopped, and she was like 15. Her parents doctor shopped until they found somebody who would do it. And then she changed her mind and was suing the doctor and goes around speaking about this. I will mention that this has nothing to do with what we do at school. Like, we aren't involved in gender transition surgery or care. You can't even give a kid an aspirin. You can give them ice if they get. So it was just a bunch of drama that went on for 7 hours. And all these people came in with their white shirts and I could not fall asleep for 2 days after that meeting. It was so stressful. They did pass the outing policy, of course, because that's why these people are there. Um, yeah, I'm getting better with not losing so much sleep because, it's just an unhealthy dynamic. We eventually rescinded the outing policy thanks to our swing voter when they talked about how much money it was costing the district. But our current board is more radical without him on it, and they passed another outing policy. They want to appear in the Supreme Court. So, and they don't care how much district money we spend on attorneys. They've hired both of Bob Tyler's law firms, conflict of interest, because he funded their campaigns. So, I mean, I wish somebody would look at the legal issues here because so far nothing's been done about it. Um, so we have the LGBTQ attacks. They're also book banning. One of the trustees has voted down every single textbook that the teachers want. They've hired the Pacific Research Institute, kind of forced the superintendent to hire them to try to control the curriculum. If you don't know who they are, they're really part of Project 2025. Um, they're on the advisory panel and they're wanting to dismantle public education. So now we have them in the mix trying to control teachers. And our superintendent can't do anything about it because they can just fire him. Um,
So Nancy,
yeah,
all of that sounds pretty grim. And I know that we have some of our members who are listening in on this conversation today are in districts that have similar situations, have similar
yeah.
kinds of boards. I'm imagining that many of them are feeling like this work might be just useless, like there's no hope. Can you address that?
I think there is hope, but the wheels of justice turn slowly. I have been getting support from various people in the state. Um, I am in a minority of one, which is very unpleasant, but I'm talking about what they're doing. I'm getting it out there. I get contacted a lot by the press. When the first outing policy passed, I was contacted by the LA news stations, PBS, The Hill. So, we're getting information out there. I do think it's important to stick with this. This will turn around. I mean, I don't even think the majority of the public supports this. I think the biggest problem we have is a lack of local news, with newspapers disappearing, and people don't even understand what's going on. So the challenge is informing the public. We haven't really figured out exactly what to do to better inform people, but we can't just give up. They're I agree with everything everybody said so far that public education, we cannot have a democracy, a functioning democracy without a robust public education system. That's one of the only unifying experiences or common experiences that most of us have. So, yeah, we just need more support. If the more people that get involved, the faster we can turn this around. So,
So
we're
one of our members in the registration had a really great question. I thought I want to pose to you. She asked, "What really makes a board member respect a speaker and listen to them?"
They need to have empathy for one thing. Our board majority dismisses everybody who does not share their opinion. Our board president refers to them as partisans. We have a lot of parents who will come in and speak, and anybody, again, and almost all of the parents who speak do not agree with them. The people that agree with them are mostly coming in from other cities. So I don't know. I mean, with this board, I honestly don't have hope that they're ever going to listen to anybody. The best thing to do is replace the board, with people that actually care about all students and care about public education and aren't there, to push their political agenda.
That's also very grim, but really useful information to know that that there may not be there are just some minds that you're not going to change, right?
Well,
And so what you have to do is change the people and stick
you
it.
could also, board members can be sued personally especially for discrimination. And if something like that happens, they might change their behavior a little bit because they're going to be worried about their personal finances. One of our former board members got into things he shouldn't have gotten into, and he was very worried about losing his house. So that would be an angle that could help rein in some of this stuff. We just need people to do it.
Well, you are all so knowledgeable and so well spoken in your areas. I wish we had all day just to spend just with this panel so we could dig a little bit deeper, but unfortunately we're running up against time constraints here. So, and we do have some questions from our members, but before I get to those, I just want to pose one question to each of you. I'd like each of you to answer this for us. Is as our members leave here today, what is one thing from your perspective, what is one thing each of you could tell our members that they can go out and do to actually make a difference? And Lisa, I'll start with you.
Okay. Can God, there's so many. The advocacy that AAUW members have had in my community has been absolutely amazing. Please keep showing up at school board meetings and clearly and consistently sending your message that support our students, that where you stand behind what the values and that quality education really does, quality public education matters. You guys are so articulate when you come to our meetings. You're 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 civically engaged voices that are thoughtful and respectful. Um, so please keep coming and sharing that and all of the points and information for the values we all agree upon.
Great. And Ariel?
Absolutely echoing, mobilizing, showing up, even at the meetings that seem like they are just complete, there's no hot topic on there. They're an average meeting. Show up, be visible, make a public comment, build relationships, and also please have what I call dinner table conversations. Talk to your neighbors, talk to your friend groups, talk to your community members about these issues. I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about these things right now. And to know that there is somebody they can speak to who has accurate information, who's going to listen, could be the difference between that person supporting the things that you believe in and supporting your children or not.
Thank you so much. And I just want to add to that, Ariel has dropped in the chat a link to more information about her organization and especially about the I'm sorry, I just lost the Out for Safe School toolkit. So one of the things our members can do that I'm going to put out there is educate yourself. If this is a topic that you're not real familiar with, you don't have any LGBTQ youth in your own life, and don't feel like you're completely up on the issues, take the time to educate yourself. If you're going to go out there and ask to talk about these policies and how school boards can support this segment of our population, of our kids, make sure you know what you're talking about. So take the time to educate yourself, and thanks for bringing all that great information to us, Ariel. And Nancy, we'll end that with you, and then I'll open it up for some questions.
Okay, I agree with everything the others have said. It's really important when people email the board, our board majority will completely ignore it. But if they come in person and speak on camera, because the public, members of the public are watching, our political leaders are watching, attorneys get information that way. The more that people will speak on camera, it's very helpful. And if you have legal connections that will help do something about what's going on our board, that would be very helpful too. I'll end it with that.
Sorry. And you mentioned something that caught my ear. You talked about the importance of local journalism. So would letters to the editor from our members be helpful?
Yeah, we have the press enterprise, but it used to have a local section for our area. It doesn't really anymore, but they could still do that. We have some of these online newspapers, like The Patch. Sometimes you can even write articles that they will print. I don't even know how many people read the local paper. I mean, I do, obviously, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. Um, yeah, we need to bring public awareness. So that is the magic bullet, and we need to figure out how to do that.
Okay. Um, I have, I'm thinking that Cornelia, I think your questions are both directed at Nancy. You've got two in here. She says, has AG Bonta gotten involved? You were talking about the suing, lodging lawsuits. Do you know?
I've actually talked to him personally, and I'm in contact, also in contact with his rep down. He has a rep down here. Um, it's hard because they're so overwhelmed with everything going on nationally. So he goes, I told him I was at an event with him and talked to him. And I told him what was going on. We got to sue them. And then his aide pulled him away for another event and we didn't get to finish the conversation. I do have his personal cell, which, and then
Well, there you
yeah,
go.
he put, and Tony Thurmond, I have talked to him several times. I've talked to Richard Barrera. I just think, part of the problem, it's harder to get help now since the election because they're all so overwhelmed. I was getting more help before the 24 election. So they're wanting to help, but they're all getting pulled in so many directions. Um, so yes, I'm talking to everybody I can speak with. I talked to Adam Schiff as well, although it's not exactly his jurisdiction, but he totally understands what I'm dealing with. But yeah.
Okay. Thanks for that. And here's a question that I think actually, Brianna, I see you're still with us. So I think you could probably actually answer this better than our panelists. Um, if you want to unmute.
Yeah.
The
So a school
question
board.
says, I think I heard, but can you confirm, can a school board hold a town hall, fewer than a majority of the board, to avoid the Brown Act, educating and guiding community in how to effectively lobby state or feds for money or policy?
Absolutely. That is a amazing idea. And you can do it with your school board or you can do it without your school board. I think that Lisa and PTA folks and many others would be happy. I know my organization often hosts these kind of town halls so that you can understand better, is the state needing to help the district, which I think Lisa mentioned there's a lot of budget cuts right now. So it's a great idea.
Right. And I have a comment here from Jacob Boyce, and I'm not going to raise it at this time, Jacob. I just want you to know that I'm going to take this suggestion to my subcommittee because I think that might be a good action item for our group to think about and talk about, maybe share later with our members. So thanks for that comment. All right. That is going to end our panel discussion. Again, as I said, I wish we had more time with all of you to dig a little bit deeper, but thank you all so much for giving us your time on this Saturday morning. We really appreciate it, and I hope our members have learned a lot from your insights, and you've given everybody some marching orders and some things that they can do. So we will go forth and continue to fight the fight. Thank you all so much. And at this time, I'm going to renege. I said before I was going to give a little break, but I think because we're running a little bit over, not bad, but a little bit. I think we're going to skip the next break. Since we're on Zoom, you can all get up and go to the bathroom whenever you want, stretch whenever you want. So we're just going to go right into our final segment with our two presenters, Diana Rohini Levine and OG Strogatz. And they are going to enlighten us about coalition building for greater community impact. They have both been involved in a fabulous project in their district that they were both instrumental in putting together. And it's called Lift Up Public Schools. And they're going to talk to you about their project and give you some hints on how you can replicate this project in your own districts, which we are encouraging you all to do. So let me tell you just a little bit about each of them. OG is an organizer with the Lift Up Public Schools Coalition. She's also a member of AAUW California School Board Project Team and on the Public Policy Committee. And she is DEI officer for the Danville Alamo Walnut Creek branch. She's also served on that branch as co-vice president of programs, co-president, and public policy chair. She's an organizer with Indivisible Reese Sisters, in Contra Costa, 350 Contra Costa Action, and the Center for Common Ground. OG previously worked for Genentech in employee engagement, and I'll just mention Genentech is a wonderful organization that actually was a huge sponsor of our Tech Trek girls when I was with the Oceanside Vista um, um, Carlsbad branch. That's where they're headquartered, and they gave us a lot of money for our Tech Trek girls. She also worked in employee engagement and organizational change management. She worked for Merck in health economics, strategic planning, marketing and sales, and for the Department of Veterans Affairs as a regional healthcare planner. She has an MSPH in health policy and administration from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, School of Public Health, and a BA in psychology from Vassar. Very impressive. Diana is an award-winning communications executive and community leader with more than 25 years of experience in journalism, strategic communications, and nonprofit leadership. She's a seasoned writer and editor. She has served as chief communications officer for a major health department, led communications for nonprofit organizations, and held senior roles in the corporate sector. She holds a BA in psychology from Harvard and also attended Hebrew University for an MA in theology. Her writing has appeared in over 500 published pieces. She's been recognized for her professional contributions with honors, including the Distinguished Service Award from the California Legislative Assembly and a certificate of recognition from the California State Senate. Diane serves as the co-chair of Lift Up Public Schools Communications and was a member along with OG of the founding team. So ladies, I turn it over to you at this time.
Thank you, Kathy. Can we pull up our slides? Well, while we're waiting for them to come up, just to thank you all for hanging in there. We're so grateful to have you join us for this discussion. It's just been such a rich series of presentations up until now. So welcome and thank you for caring and joining us to learn more. All right, let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So a quick overview. What we'll be covering is how Lift Up Public Schools, or LUPS, came to be, what it is, some successes that we've experienced so far and some challenges, what comes next for us, and some suggested next steps if you're at a point where you're thinking about forming a local coalition. And we're also really wanting to be plugged into what brings you here. So I would invite you to post that in the chat. What are your particular interests? We want to be as responsive to them as we can be. And for our colleagues who are monitoring chat, as soon as we can get through our slides and picking it up for questions, if we can just begin there. What are people particularly interested in that we may not have covered in our slides at that point? So that's what we're going to be focusing on, and let's get into it. Okay, next slide, please. Right, so how Lift Up Public Schools came to be. Grassroots organizations have been working in parallel. That was our experience. Again, I'm with the AAUW branch, Danville, Alamo, Walnut Creek, and our own observation was that a local Moms for Liberty chapter launched here in Central Contra Costa County in 2022. And we had a lot of discussion about that within the branch, and members committed to attend the monthly meetings of San Ramon Valley Unified School District. And we saw a dichotomy in terms of the presence of community at the board meetings, right? There were many individuals and groups who are vehemently opposed to honest, inclusive public education. And there were also a number of individuals and groups who support it. And we also noticed a dichotomy in terms of the way they were showing up insofar as the people who were opposed to honest, inclusive public education seemed to be pretty well organized, coordinated, had a lot of consistency around their messaging. And those of us who are supportive of honest, inclusive public education, not so much so, right? So it became very clear that that solidarity can be very impactful in terms of the power of your messaging, and we knew that we had to shift. For those of us who are champions for great public education, we had to shift from doing advocacy in a siloed way to building. So we knew our assignment, right? In terms of how we proceeded, let's see, we had our branch public policy chair, Lorinda Ochoa, who took it upon herself to connect with the leaders of the groups that were presenting they were offering public comments, et cetera, at our monthly board meetings, the meetings of the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. So she took it upon herself to have one-on-one meetings with leaders of these groups who were frequenting the school board meetings, and she solicited their interest in forming a grassroots coalition that would advocate together in a coordinated way for excellent public education. And all of that work resulted in the leaders of those groups pulling together. We had a leaders workshop in February of 2024, and we all agreed at the leaders workshop that we were going to launch a coalition, which we proceeded to do. In April, we had a half-day summit that was open to the public. So we are just shy of 2 years old. In terms of, so what is LUFS? As you see here, we're an all-volunteer coalition of grassroots groups from 2 counties, Contra Costa and Alameda, and we are advocating for excellent public education delivered in settings that are safe and welcoming to all. Our mission to advocate for high-quality public education that values diversity, equity, and inclusion in service of a vision of a vibrant, democratic society of compassionate, well-informed, engaged community members. That's what we're after. Our org chart. So we've evolved this org structure over the last year, and we're very much in the midst of fully implementing it. So what we've got is a leadership team that is comprised of the co-leads of 4 working groups. Okay, so these are all groups that are rolling their sleeves up and they're making it happen. The first that you see listed on the left is Hubs. The local Hubs group supports the establishment and the growth of a local advocacy hub in each one of our targeted school districts. So we have no intention of trying to hit all the school districts across Contra Costa and Alameda. What we've done is to say, okay, who has come to us expressing an interest in being a member of this coalition? What are their home school districts? Let's focus on those as the targeted districts. So this year we've got 16 districts that we're targeting. Each local hub has 2 main responsibilities, and this really harkens to what we've been hearing thematically across the course of the morning, right? One big responsibility is showing up at those monthly school board meetings, observing, monitoring. And then the second of 2 big responsibilities is recruiting and vetting pro-public education school board candidates. So the local hubs really, in terms of LUPS in any of these coalitions, that work of a local hub, that's the beating heart of what we do. Yeah. The next group that you see, communications, has built and evolved our website and our social media presence, manages our media relationships, as well as our community outreach initiatives to cultivate awareness, understanding, and action in support of great public education. We'll say a little bit more about some of the initiatives that we've done and that we have that we're looking forward to. And the communications team also manages internal communication with our LUPS membership. We have, at this point, a roster of about 250 folks in terms of broader coalition membership. Next one, operations. So the operations team is charged with researching, tracking, and recommending positions regarding K-12 public education issues at every level, right? From local, county, state, to federal levels. What do we want to take a position on? How do we want to communicate that? That's where we interface with our communications team. The ops team also helps us identify and network with like-minded coalitions across the country. Because that's part of how we're going to continue to build our strength through building that connective tissue with other similar coalitions nationally. And the ops team also manages our leadership team and our to-be-launched advisory council, advisory to the leadership team. We'll launch that later this year. So that's the operations team. And then fourth of 4 is the volunteer recruitment and retention team. we want to grow the movement. And so we want to be able to engage in outreach to PTAs and other communities, other stakeholders in this public education ecosystem, let them know what we're up to and invite them to join us. Next slide, please. Over to you, Diana. Right. You're muted, I think. Hang on. I'm not hearing you. You're muted. Yep, try again.
Can you say something, Diana, so we know if we're, no, you're still, you maybe try what Ariel did. She called in and we could hear her over her phone. OG, is there anything you can cover while we're waiting for Diana?
I can do that, sure. So what you see here is a representation of most, if not all, of the organizations that are represented in Lift Up Public Schools. So as you can see, it's pretty diverse. It's, I think, in my activist experience, it's a pretty unique mix of partisan and nonpartisan entities. And that's basically what we've got. And because we have such a rich diversity of voices, there really is no one that dominates. Given the diversity, we really have to make a practice of listening to one another. Where do we overlap in terms of our agendas, and where can we work together, and where can we bring unique perspectives that we don't necessarily share? How can that enrich the way we move forward in terms of our shared passion around great public education? So I'm thinking, what shall I do here? Shall I move on?
Diana, do you have the telephone number to dial in? It's in your confirmation email.
Not speak.
Is this working?
We're on. Go
All
for it.
right. So
Good
I
job.
have a technologist as a husband. So I take the call. I think that this is great because that really shows that partnerships are key. And that each, yes. So, Victor, I'm hearing a little refurb. So what I wanted to say about this is coalition. Sorry, I'm hearing myself a secondary time. So I'm just fixing that. Why don't we go on to the slide 6? How does this work?
I think we're good.
All right, great. So this is why coalitions work. I don't think anything on this slide is a surprise to anyone, but the reason they work might be of interest to folks. One is when families and educators and community partners align, individual voices become a unified force. And so that collective power of community is just so powerful. It builds trust, it builds buy-in, it also builds long-term support. And that's something that is important because we don't want to be a flash in and a flash out. We want long-term support. Coalitions last beyond the leadership changes, a funding cycle or short-term initiatives. So shared ownership allows work to go forward. So one partner can step back or one partner can work on something else and the work still moves forward. So I think it's really important. Shared resources and expertise. No single organization, as you can see in this Zoom, I do not have the technical expertise to fix my volume control, but we lean on the folks that we need to that have the capacity and skills needed to build up the coalition. And so we allow partners to contribute what they do best, reducing burnout and increasing impact, because we all have a lot on our plates. An example would be nonprofits providing enrichment or consulting. I will tell you right here, this symposium is taking the place of our summit. We do not have capacity to do another summit this year with our small but mighty team. And so this partnership is so valuable to us because we can still find a way to connect with folks and share what we've learned in order to spread the word about coalition building. So we thank AAUW for their event. Stronger advocacy and credibility. Decision makers tend to respond more to coordinated community voices versus isolated communication. So coalitions bring a diverse perspective that strengthens the legitimacy and influence of whatever it is that we want to accomplish. Coalitions work because they turn shared values into shared action and lasting results. I think next slide.
Sure. Let's turn now to some of the examples of successes that we've had so far. Around coalitions forming or strengthening, we have consensus, thanks to LUPS, about what good looks like. What's the ideal mix of skills, experience, and knowledge for a pro-public education school board trustee? And that consensus has enabled the effective recruitment and vetting and support for strong school board candidates at the local hub level across all of our targeted districts. We saw that in the 24 cycle, and we look forward to more of the same in the cycle that we've just commenced, right? Just to be more specific, in 2024, as one example, there were a couple of school board candidates in one of our targeted districts whose platform language indicated they might be appropriate. They might be competitive for open seats. Local hub members went to work. They applied the consensus on what the ideal candidate criteria are. They researched the candidates. They met with them one-on-one where they could, and they learned that beneath the broadly appealing platform language, in fact, they were not public education advocates. And the coalition used the recommendations of those local hub members to identify as a coalition the genuinely pro-public education candidates that LUPS chose to support in the 24 cycle. I would offer another impact of, an example of the impact of coalition building as more powerful grassroots rapid response to local challenges pertaining to public education. Last spring, there were members of one of the hubs that alerted our entire coalition to a group of anti-trans activists who were conducting daily demonstrations outside one of our elementary schools. The local hub members put out a call to all of us. Anybody who was willing and able, please show up and counter the anti-trans messengers. And the upshot was that we averaged between 70 and 100 LEPS members turning out daily with supportive, inclusive messages, rainbow flags. We had lots of bubbles. And on the other side of the street, there were about 10 anti-trans activists with very toxic messages. It was a very powerful demonstration of where the overwhelming majority of our communities are at in terms of their support. Second, increased school board monitoring. You've heard about this all morning. The importance of establishing local hubs where we build a steady presence with school board meeting monitoring in all of our targeted districts. And in terms of community education and training, we are learning from one another across districts and across counties through this LEPS coalition about, just as examples, how to vet school board candidates, how to run successful recall campaigns to replace right-wing extremist school board trustees, and how to run successful parcel tax campaigns. So lots of cross-pollination of ideas, lots of grassroots upskilling. Next slide. Thanks. So let's see. So I've talked about candidate support, the grassroots upskilling. In terms of school district support, our members have been told repeatedly by district staff and trustees that our presence, just our very presence at a monthly school board meeting, has shifted the climate in the meeting room away from hostility and mistrust toward more openness and curiosity. Our public comments consistently draw connections between specific district initiatives and our commitments to high quality public education and to social and racial justice for everyone. I want to just not to lose the thought. I was really so moved by how Nancy described her experience with her school board. And one of the things I want to lift up, one of the things that she mentioned, and it also is a point back to what Brianna was mentioning. These school board meetings are recorded. So one could be in front of a board and it's, fairly right-wing extremist. And let's say almost all, if not all of the board has a point of view that is not championing terrific public education. Getting members of the public, one after another, individually or representing groups, consistently messaging the importance of great public education. All of that's recorded. All of that is available to us to view afterward. Nancy was mentioning people, electeds are watching what happens at the school board meetings. Anybody can pull up that recording and see the comments. And any of us who are activists locally can raise up the visibility of those recordings and make sure that they are shown. So even though you could be up against an unfriendly opposing board, please do not underestimate the potential impact and the reverberation of that public comment messaging in favor of public education that's coming in front of the board at that meeting. There's a lot of power there. So much for interfacing with school districts. I also want to talk about our summit that we had in April of 2024. It drew a really beautiful audience of about 150 people. Leadership, you'll remember that partnership slide. So we had leaders from PFLAG, League of Women Voters, PTA. We had city council members, school board members. We had teachers, union leadership, and students. The event opened with a resource fair where there were diverse organizations represented who provided information about their priorities and opportunities to volunteer. And overall, the summit agenda telescoped from a national perspective to regional to local presentations on key challenges to public education. One of the top rated segments out of that summit was our locally focused panel discussion, which included a school board trustee, a student activist and organizer, a candidate in a campaign to recall a right-wing extremist trustee, and a second trustee who moderated the discussion. The panelists and the moderator collectively represented 5 different school districts across Alameda and Contra Costa counties, and they had a fantastically robust conversation about our shared challenges and our shared priorities. And the summit concluded with time for local school district networking. It was really energizing. It was motivating. It was empowering. Yeah, LUP Summit. All right. And next slide.
And the next slide is about LUPS Summit, but I just want to mention something OG said, the power of videotapes at board meetings. So I was a lead committee member for the recall of 2 board members in Sonoma Glen, if you saw that on the news. And honestly, those videotapes of board meetings helped us to unseat 2 extremist board members. So the impact of it was just so significant. So we successfully unseated 2 extremist board members from a board of 3. So there is hope. There is hope. Um, this shows the LUP Summit. As OG said, it was a great room filled with leaders, with students. We engaged school board leadership, potential school board members. We elevated student voices with visibility and meaningful participation. They weren't just attendees, they actually participated in the summit. We delivered a cohesive professional summit that people could get some beautiful nuggets from. We connected people and organizations to others at the resource fair, which we at first weren't sure how successful that would be, and it brought credibility and depth to the summit, and really translated into action. And by connecting attendees to organizations and other leaders to other leaders in real life, that's the thing, right? The summit balanced leadership, student voice, execution, and practical takeaways. And that created an impact that extended beyond the summit itself. It really was the public launch of the LUPS brand in a public way. Next slide, please. So LUPS marketing. So we really wanted to establish kind of clear coalition identity, name and logo and mission early on so that people could join with the confidence of that we were going to have a digital presence, we were going to be professional about it, and we were going to be consistent about it, and to create a centralized digital hub for all this information and resources. So although the coalition's only 2 years old, our YouTube channel really hasn't gotten off the ground just yet. We were intentional about building credibility early to establish that clarity around our mission and to lean on our leadership to help us do that. We created a website, social media, um, connected with partners and community members, and made it easy to find us and easy to contact us and easy to access our resources. We've made mistakes, but having a centralized digital hub definitely allows us to function as a connector rather than just a concept. So the focus of these first 2 years has been on infrastructure and visibility, not invisibility, and visibility, which positions the coalition well for deeper engagement. We're just getting started. Next slide.
Yeah, so some of the challenges that we've encountered to date, just a fair balance. First one, volunteer capacity. So with perfect hindsight, I can offer that we set very ambitious goals, and I would say they were not sufficiently aligned with the available number and interests and talents of our volunteers. And of course, that can be a setup for real frustration. So that good learning from that. As a leadership team, we're focused on being more attentive to striking that sweet spot between our aspirations and our volunteer capacity. Coordination across groups. You have seen the rich mix of organizations represented in LUPS. That's an enormous strength, the diversity of partisan and nonpartisan groups engaged at the same time. These groups have distinct priorities that certainly do not perfectly overlap, and that has really prompted us to work at being more intentional about practicing patience and the ability to be flexible and adaptive, to re-anchor around good intention, and to err on the side of over communicating with an emphasis on thoughtfulness. Sustaining engagement, that I think most of the people on this call are very familiar with that, right? The people who are drawn to this kind of work tend to be drawn to a lot of community-based advocacy work. So they bring many pressing concerns to us, and there is a high potential for distraction. There's a potential for burnout, and we have to be attentive to calibrating each volunteer's contributions to their interests and their available energy. Decision making. So we started out with what I would say was a pretty unwieldy group of about 20 of us trying to row together to make decision makings. And as we referenced earlier in this presentation, we're now a leaner, smaller leadership team. And one of the things we want to work on when you move from that larger group to a smaller group is how do you balance the streamlining and decision making along with wanting to constantly cultivate engagement and involvement and build our LUPS coalition. So that's something that we need to be attentive to. Group norms. How do we get to a place where every team member internalizes responsibility for stewardship of the team? We've got to agree on a short list of operating principles that will guide us in the way we function as a team, and we need to agree on how we're going to enforce those group norms. And that is very much work in progress. So challenges. Let's see, next slide. Local hubs in action. So I want to give us even a little bit more time for Q&A because I know we're running late. I already referenced an example of a hub that came together in terms of the recruitment and vetting of pro-public education candidates, how they did, what they did, how they did it, what the impact of it was for our coalition and for the electoral results, which were very favorable. And I think why hubs matter, probably intuitive to you all at this point. You know, a local hub has the people who know that community. They know who the power players are. They either know themselves or they know people who know how to get to those optimal school board candidates. And hubs can generate potential that helps us beyond the electoral cycles. There are other. I already gave examples of a hub that had an issue that had to do with the elementary school and these toxic messengers that were in front of the school and how we came up against them. So it's beyond the electoral cycles. It's other issues that come up that pertain to the public education experience. And some of the members wind up getting involved in local city council issues and how we already know one another. We bonded together around our public education advocacy. What else can we do? So lots of potential power and impact with hubs. Let's see, next slide.
So let's talk about LUPS 2026 and beyond. And I'm going to skip a little bit through this because some of these are extremely self-explanatory. One is we're really interested in preparing trustees for elections early. That matters, building awareness, educating the community, and supporting pro-public education candidates before the election season begins. So we're really focused on that. Another one would be that we want to do outreach, and that includes, and I'm going to press share some information, contact with us. LUPS has a public education webinar series. We use webinars to educate, activate, and connect community members around public education as a topic. So we're going to be doing this on your screen. You see our public education webinar series. It's free, it's virtual, it's the fourth Thursday of February, March, and April. And did I mention it's free? Yes, it's free. So sign up, join. There's a QR code on the screen right now. And there's also information in the chat. The other couple I wanted to mention is press and media as partnerships. Often we think of them as the enemy, but media can be your major collaborator. And I think that this was mentioned previously, how sharing stories and data and voices so that we highlight the value of public schools and community impact is so important. That really helps the general public to understand the policy changes or the school board and what they're talking about and the agenda items. So media as your partner is important. And lastly, I'm going to talk about ongoing connection. So maintaining momentum through regular communication and shared wins and continued opportunities for engagement, not just during campaign cycles. So we have to really think about a cadence that isn't just activated during campaign cycles. Next slide. We're trying to move forward quick so that we can get to Q&A. This one is one-step change making. So we have a three-step system that we suggest. So this one, everything here, you know what it says. Basically, step one is about momentum, not about perfection. Sometimes we can get in the way of our own selves. The work begins with one small step, an intentional step. A local focus allows us to effectively concentrate on where the need is the most. So one small step, often it takes us to begin a meaningful change. Next slide.
Right. Step two, find your people. And you can pull this from what we've already discussed, right? In my own experience with Danville, Alamo, Walnut Creek branch, it started with one person. It started with Lorinda Ochoa saying, hey, we got to get in formation, folks. So it can be one, two, or three people who are in your same school district, buddy up and say, we're going to start going to those meetings. Everybody doesn't have to be at every meeting. It can be on a rotating schedule. And we do, if somebody could repost the school board project toolkit, as has been referenced earlier today, there's a lot of valuable content in that. We commend that to you. Observe, listen, and learn. Yep. Next. Step 3 of 3, right? So where the prior slide was really about, let's focus on getting ourselves to a school board meeting, who's showing up in the community, who's in support of public education, who is opposed, and then learning about who's on the dais, what's the profile of each of those trustees? Where are they at? What about the district staff, the district leadership? Where are they at? So you can be such a sponge. You can learn so much by sitting into these school board meetings, and it is the perfect setup for this in terms of, all right, come an electoral cycle, who's going to be running for reelection? What do we think about those individuals? Are they really going to be champions for public education or not? If not, let's activate ourselves as a network. Let's start looking for people in our community who are going to be terrific on that board. So it's building the knowledge, building those connections. Okay, and let's go to the next slide.
This is talking about what's next. So first, thank you, Tracy, for posting the toolkit in the chat. That was helpful. Before we move on to our favorite part, which is Q&A or Q and reflections, which I saw from another speaker's slide deck, which I'm going to steal, where we get to hear your voices. Please remember that meaningful change doesn't start with having all the answers. It starts with showing up. So leave today with the confidence in what you already bring to the table, clarity about where you can act, and connections to others who will walk alongside you. Support from LUPS is available, so lean on us. And this work continues through conversation, learning, and follow-up. Whether your next step is signing up for a webinar in the chat or reaching out to a partner, or simply starting a conversation in your community. One small action is enough to begin. I'm going to close on, as Princess Anna from the film Frozen reminds us, when everything feels uncertain, the right next thing is enough to move forward. Next slide. So
Everything here is in the chat, right? So I think we'll just stop
Yeah.
on Q&A, right? Yeah.
I think we can move to take questions.
Yeah, we can just take down the deck. It's Q&A.
So before we do that, I just want to say thank you so much to both of you. You are just doing astounding work up there in your district, and I know that it's making a tremendous difference. And before we get to the questions, I actually want to read something. It'll probably embarrass you, Ochi, because these are so nice and humble. But this is something that Lisa actually posted privately to OG, and it just had such a tremendous impact on me. I want to read it to all of you because I want to sort of leave you. We've heard some things that are great and helpful today. We've heard a few things that are a little discouraging. And in these discouraging times, we need any good information that we can get. So I wanted to read this to you. Lisa says to OG, UNAUW's presence at the San Ramon Valley Unified School District Board meetings has made a significant impact on our community. Notably, our students feel supported, especially those who have felt marginalized and treated poorly by some of our regular, more extreme, loud community members who attend board meetings. So congratulations for that, and kudos again to both of you, and our thanks for coming and enlightening us. And let me pull up a couple of questions here. You had a few more that came up earlier, and I was able to go ahead and answer them, but here's a few new ones. So how is LUPS engaging or communicating with the non-English speaking community members? Either of you want to take that?
So I think I'll take that because I'm communications. So one of the things that we realized in our foundational building was some of the gaps. Well, language is one of them. Personally, my daughter is studying American Sign Language, and I'm hoping that she can volunteer to be at our future meetings so that there's one element there. I know that we try to keep things virtual because people with different challenges to attending, they might be able to. I know that some of the programs have a translation tool in them, built in them. And so often those folks know how to use that. We've not learned how to do that, but it's been a question in some of our leadership meetings. So I think that's our 2026 and beyond, one of our goals. So thank you so much for bringing it up. It's something top of mind.
Yeah, I would say that's great. I appreciate your flagging it. I think we have work to do on that. Thank you.
Thanks. And we have a question from Donna. Will the recordings be available to non-AUW members? Are the recording of this, if you're talking about this webinar, this symposium, Donna, this will be posted on our webpage, and that is accessible to the public. So yes, anybody who's interested can just go into the school board project and pull up all our recordings. Sandra Hansen had a comment, not a question, but I'm going to read it because I think it's great for us to think about. She says, I just finished reading That Librarian. It's dealing with censorship issues. A prime takeaway we can all do is to provide support to those who need it. Give them your thanks, stand up, and be part of the solution. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Sandra. And this one just came up. I haven't had a chance to pre-read it, so I'm just going to read it out loud. We'll see if we can answer it or not. Right-wing extremism, disinformation, and corruption are testing our country today, and our culture is continuing with misogyny, sexism, and racism. How do we as a community monitoring public education combat the tsunami as a coalition more than from blue states? Well, I hope we've given you some answers to that question today. In our symposium, we've had lots of our speakers address what they're doing. When you say as a community, if you're talking about as an AUW community versus individual communities, as an AUW community, we're doing lots. We're doing symposiums like this. We're with the school board project. We're giving our opportunities, our members, we hope, lots of opportunities to be engaged and the skills and tools that they need to do it. So if either of you want to comment on that, if you have some other ideas, can you see the question, or you want me to reread it? It says, how do we as a community monitoring public education combat the tsunami as a coalition more than from blue states? That's a little different question.
Mhm. One of the things that is, I referenced it fleetingly, but one of the things that I'm avidly interested in, and we've thrown it to our ops team as a task, is who else in the country is doing this kind of stuff? We are not alone. One of the first groups that Lorinda Ochoa drew my attention to was in Arizona. And I don't have the proper titles of the organizations. We can look that up afterwards. So
Stand Up for Public Schools, I think, is
okay. Thank you. So Arizona has one. I have run into encountered other national coalitions. So that's an area of avid curiosity for me. But yeah, I mean, the other thing I would offer, and I know we have to be careful not to be partisan, but there are blue dots in red oceans. And I think that with some of the other advocacy groups, some of the grassroots advocacy groups that I'm involved in, and I trust that many of you are involved in, to connect with them and to find out where are those blue dots in those red locales where we can connect with them, so that, again, the power is local, right? You got to connect with people, like it's a bottom up kind of thing. So who's doing that wonderful work in those red states, and how can we be supportive of their efforts?
And I also want to mention, for those of you who may not know, I also sit on the AAUW National Public Policy Committee, and they have asked me to do a webinar, which is coming up on February 12th. And if you're interested in what's happening at a national level, you're certainly welcome and encouraged to tune into that. We're going to be having a panel of speakers talking about what's happening in their states and what they're doing to do this work. And one of them will be from Florida, and just having real battles and challenges down there. But she's doing some great work nonetheless. And another one will be from Pennsylvania. And then I'm going to be talking about our project, and we'll be talking collectively of how in different kinds of states and political atmospheres this work can be done. So AAUW is on top of this, not just here in California, but nationwide. It's something that we're all interested in, and we're on it. And I'm going to leave you with that thought, that I hope that you leave here feeling like you're on it and you have gotten some good ideas on how you can proceed and things that you can do. I hope you found our presentations inspiring, informative, and motivating. And you can let us know if you want to take a few minutes to complete a short survey that you'll have access to as soon as we finish. And one of the things that's going to ask you on there is, what is your takeaway? Just one takeaway from today. What is one action item that you're going to go out and do as a result of what you've learned today? And I want to leave you with this thought about mine. And it was really a surprise to me. It was something I wasn't expecting. And that was the conversation that I was having with Nancy. And it really hit home to me that sometimes it's true. You just cannot change minds, no matter how eloquent we speak, how knowledgeable we are, how well informed we are, how well we conduct ourselves. There are just some minds who can't be changed. So what we need to concentrate on in those instances is changing the bodies of the minds that sit there on those boards. And that brings me back to this last thought, is I'm very, very sad that we weren't able to have our speaker on recruiting school board members, because that's something our project really wants to focus on this year. And we're going to be talking about how we might in the near future, revisit this and see if we can't find another organization that will help us out, and maybe we can have another webinar on that. We'll see if we get enough interest, but it's one thing that we can all do. We can find those good school board members who support inclusive public education. We can find ways to support them, and we can help get them on our boards. So with that, I thank you all for coming, for giving us your time on this Saturday morning, and go forth and do good.